The Talent of Fausto. The story of Fausto Cippà and his organization. Massimo Tafi. Preface. My father Fausto didn't have the talent of Mr. Ripley, invented by Patricia Highsmith and made famous first by Alain Delon, then by Matt Damon. He didn't have that cunning and that hidden arrogance which allows the protagonist of the novel to deceive high society people in order to give himself dream summers. Nor did he have the cynical coldness that emerges towards the end of the cinematic version. He had a different kind of talent, one whose origins I never knew. When we decided to embark on this family story, my knowledge of Fausto's past was at best superficial. A matter of character, I've always said to myself, of priorities. In these years both he and I have had other priorities than sharing that piece of individual history, before his marriage to my mother, before his return to Chiasso, before the business. And probably in this closure, in this lack of reciprocal propensity for sharing, there has also been an influence from a family spirit that I would define as mountainous, tough, and sometimes scowling. In this period I imagined how it would have been to listen to the stories of his life before marriage, when he was a child, when it's easy to let oneself be carried away by suggestions and perfumes of a bohemian, adventurous, full of extraordinary meetings and useful crossroads life. A journey that is undoubtedly fascinating. But then I noticed that these same stories, heard for the first time as an adult, had a completely different depth. I realized, for example, that it wasn't the idea that my father managed to set foot in London's upper class during the second post-war period which captivated me at every word he spoke. Nor was his ability to make himself indispensable to great and very great international entrepreneurs. No. What fascinated me were his courage and above all the ease with which he could convince perfect strangers to trust and rely on him. A magnetic charisma, perhaps. Or the ability to interpret perfectly the needs of one's time. A time when the world was much smaller than today, but in which work, commitment, and perseverance were qualities that, if used correctly and at the right times, could really allow any kind of rise. Today everything has become bigger, faster, and more complex. Entrepreneurs are asked for a capacity for vision and foresight exponentially superior to what has happened so far. On the other hand, characteristics like Fausto's, perseverance and dedication to work, have become increasingly rare, especially among young generations, who compensate them with an equally surprising speed of thought and versatility. And yet, despite these changes, there is a characteristic that can make any business antifragile: the bond with the territory. A gentle push towards daily action that is probably one of the strongest characteristics we can be proud of in Cippà Trasporti. In fact, even if this book revolves around a central figure, Fausto's, much of what is told would not have been possible without Chiasso, its inhabitants, and above all everyone who has passed through our company. I believe that one of the ills afflicting our society is the loss of temporal depth. We are so used to focusing on how to satisfy our immediate needs that we have lost not only the ability to imagine the future but also that of giving value to our history, our past. That's why I wanted to rewind the tape and tell the backstory. Everything that led to the founding of our logistics company. Because it is with the eyes of the past that one can give true value to this extraordinary present and find the strength to imagine and design the future. Roberta Cippà Cavadini. Author's note. When I suggested to Roberta Cippà Cavadini that she collect the story of the company founded by her father and now led by her for several years, I had no clear idea of how it would materialize, but in general terms I thought it would be a slim volume packed with dates, documents, numbers, on such and such a year. Cippà Trasporti had invoiced so and so much because the international situation was favorable and major clients were such and such an organization and another. In short, a precise and punctual chronology of facts, growth, successes, and some failures. My hypothesis, in reality rather banal, promptly disintegrated into thin air when Roberta, as if she had read my thoughts, came out with the following phrase: "I want it to be like a novel, a book that you can read, not a dull celebratory tome." Gulp! A comic strip character would have exclaimed in this situation, and I gulped myself at the time. The challenge was great and the bar had suddenly been raised by several centimeters. From then on, rather than searching for archives, I dedicated most of my time to listening. Listening to the protagonists, first and foremost the main protagonist, Fausto Cippà. Listening and having them tell their stories while trying to grasp the personality of the company that lives from the spirit and intelligence of those who lead it and work there, before even the facts that have brought it to be what it is today. I listened to and questioned many more people than appear in the book, and I apologize to each of them for this, but their stories were a great help to me, and much of what I understood and perceived I tried to convey in some way through the stories told. However, there are people I want to mention explicitly because they helped me understand Fausto beyond the company: Wally, Anna, Andrea. Wally, Fausto's wife and Roberta's mother, because although she has little space in the book, she is not a businesswoman, welcomed me initially with reserve but then was generous with stories and courtesy. Anna and Andrea are Fausto's children and Roberta's younger siblings, who also made themselves available to tell their stories with great willingness, even though it's not always easy to reveal the family dynamics. Finally, Roberta, because without her willingness to take on this project it would never have started, and without her patience it would never have been completed. The war is over. The war is over only recently. The ruins remain. Not in Switzerland, nor in the canton of Ticino, where the wisdom of the people and the convenience of the belligerents have kept the country out of conflict. Here all houses are still standing, businesses too, and families do not have to count their dead at the front or under bombardments. But even here, the ruins remain. The war did not pass with bombs and cannon fire, but passed through refugees, evacuees, deserters, asylum seekers, and applicants. In particular Ticino, so close to fascist Italy, belligerent Italy, Italy of partisans who cross the border to escape roundups or to meet in secret places emissaries of the Allies for arms, money, reassurances. Italy of Jews and politicians fleeing from raids to avoid German camps. The authorities of the canton have set up over 150 collection camps and tried to put a brake on this migratory wave that, like all migratory waves, is not always welcomed by the population, which does not live in prosperity and has to divide what little it has with the new arrivals. And so the last years of the conflict, from September 43 to April 45, have left wounds and scars even among peaceful and neutral Ticinesi. The most painful wounds are those of economic hardship in which all Ticinese families struggle since, in 1939, the canton administration introduced a new item into its nomenclature: war economy. Paradoxical for one of the few neutral countries in Europe, but war makes itself felt even here. Every municipality is forced to open a specific municipal office that deals with food supplies, rationing, cards, which become words of everyday use. Throughout the Confederation, the Whelan Plan, named after the agronomist and politician who devised it, is introduced, which provides for the expansion of cultivable areas using parks and green zones to make up for the shortage of foodstuffs due to the blockade of imports, especially from Italy. Despite these efforts, the situation remains difficult. In particular, economic and commercial autarky has been strangling shipping companies since 1940 onwards, many of which have been forced to close down. Chiasso, a key hub for the passage of goods between Italy and Switzerland, suffers particularly in this situation. It is necessary to wait until the end of the war for activity to resume gradually. Switzerland, due to its neutrality, has hosted many British people who escaped the devastation of their country. Some of them will be among the first to resume activity and, thanks to the many dollars lent by Americans, will reopen their businesses and, taking advantage of Switzerland's position and Chiasso's, will start trading goods with and from their own country again. The grandfather. The group of youngsters climbed up the path with a lively air about them. That climb to Monte Cenri wasn't an arduous one, but for those 6-year-olds it was their first time venturing out without parents or friends by their side. They weren't unused to spending long periods away from home, playing in Chiasso's fields, kicking stones or a ball around. But this time it was different. Firstly, it was a school outing, so that in itself made it something new. Then the teacher had said they'd be out all day, and each boy would need to bring their own food and drink, eating their lunch sat on a rock or in a field like proper explorers. Finally, their destination was the summit of Monte Cenri, not too close to home, and getting there meant taking a bus first and then walking for hours, trying to conserve energy and supplies along the way. It was hot, and after the initial slopes they tackled with youthful enthusiasm, the boys had slowed down and eventually stopped talking altogether. Now they climbed in a steady rhythm, marching behind their teacher in line, whispering quietly to one another as they saved their breath. Lunchtime was approaching, soon the church bells would announce it, and the boys had been walking for ages on their little legs. The teacher finally signaled them to stop. The boys' voices returned as they caught sight of a perfect spot to rest, a large field with plenty of rocks and some trees here and there where they could enjoy some shade. It was a surprise, really. From the winding path none of them had expected this open space to suddenly appear, like the climb would never end before reaching the summit, which still seemed far off. Fausto looked for a place to sit down, just like the others. He was a bit tired and hot. As he talked with his 3 or 4 companions who'd sat down beside him, he pulled out what little food he had left from his bag, some bread and half an apple. It wasn't much, but Fausto would make do. After all, it was his choice of what to bring along on this long walk, and he wasn't one to complain. Just as he was about to eat, he spotted a man emerging from the path they'd followed just moments before. He couldn't see him clearly because he was still a bit far off and in shadow. The man seemed old. Fausto judged that by his cautious gait, not that his pace wasn't steady, but there was something deliberate about the way he moved forward. The man appeared to be paying close attention where he put his feet, with his head down like that, but you could tell he was used to walking in the mountains because he did it naturally, despite the heat which probably made him sweat under his jacket as if he were strolling through Chiasso's town center. All the boys watched him with curiosity. Those who'd been facing away turned around when they saw their friend's eyes fixed on something behind them. Fausto couldn't quite put his finger on it, but there was something familiar in that way of walking. The man followed the path as it wound its way up, stepping out of the bright light into a shadowy area where Fausto could see him more clearly. As soon as he recognized him, Fausto's jaw dropped. It was his grandfather. Their grandfather. But what on earth was he doing there? Fausto knew that his grandfather loved walking in the mountains and that almost every day, whenever he managed to slip away from his wife's watchful eye, he'd climb up paths and fields for the sheer pleasure of it, without any other goal than being out in the fresh air among the mountains he loved so much. Some people said he did it to get away from his wife's constant complaining. Fausto wondered if their grandfather had coincidentally chosen that exact path for his daily walk or if he'd been following them all along, observing their behavior without being seen and then reporting back to Fausto's mother. With a mix of apprehension and uncertainty, Fausto watched as the grandfather made his way towards him. He didn't seem to have done anything wrong, but you never knew how adults might judge things differently from children. "Hi," said the grandfather with a smile. Fausto stood up, still feeling a bit uncertain, and walked over to meet him. Without saying another word, their grandfather pulled out a small bag and an object wrapped in a sheet of oiled paper, like the kind butchers use, and handed them to Fausto. Fausto took the package, unwrapped it, and found a fresh sandwich with his favorite cheese and an orange inside. "I saw you weren't bringing much food," said the grandfather, "and I thought you might get hungry soon." He didn't say anything else and just turned around to continue walking back home. It would be one of the last oranges Fausto would taste for a long time because the war would close off borders and no more Sicilian fruit, especially oranges, would reach Italy for 5 long years. Perhaps it was there that Fausto began to understand how important it is to bring what people need exactly when they need it. Certainly, it was then he realized that affection doesn't always require words to be expressed. Courage and inexperience. Fausto is no longer the 6-year-old boy he once was. Now, at 15 years old, he attends a vocational school in Chiasso. He enjoys the company of his peers, doesn't shy away from partying and entertainment. In short, he's just like any other teenager of his age, nothing more, perhaps something less. If anything, it's the combination of a sense of duty typical of his age with a strong sense of responsibility, likely inherited from his father, who as a border guard used to repeat a motto from neighboring Mussolini-era Italy: "The country is served even by guarding a petrol drum." A sense of duty and humility, 2 qualities that, aside from rhetoric and propaganda, complement each other well in the boy's head and character. Fausto has another great asset: insatiable curiosity. He enjoys understanding and learning, finds it fascinating, and there's nothing he doesn't find interesting or that doesn't spark his desire to know more. At school, he has no preferences, he likes all subjects equally. And he also likes girls, very much so. It's the years of first stirrings, erotic turmoil, fantasies about their classmates' forms. It's the time when games become bolder and hands don't always stay where they should be. Girls, in his fantasies and his friends' chatter, are beautiful and interesting in proportion to the size of their breasts and hips. Fausto is no exception, and searching for more or less secluded spots to exchange increasingly less clumsy kisses is one of his favorite pastimes. Until something puts an end to that time and Fausto finds himself suddenly catapulted into adulthood with courage and a lack of experience. It's the summer of '47, the war in Europe has ended but left behind heavy and painful traces of its passage. School has also finished, and Fausto could be spending his days roaming the streets with his friends or chasing after some less shy classmates when one of his teachers, who has a lot of esteem for him, calls him. He's had an unusual request from a foreigner, an Englishman who trades in some way but it's not clear how or what. This Englishman is looking for a quick and clever boy to help him with some errands, do some easy tasks that are extremely difficult for him because he doesn't speak any other language besides English. The teacher immediately thought of Cippà because he's smart and, above all, reliable. Fausto doesn't hesitate for a moment, he accepts. He doesn't even ask his parents' permission or opinion, just as he won't when the Englishman offers him the chance to follow him to London. And he'll offer it with a very strange motivation, perhaps acceptable only because of the extraordinary times Europe is going through. Here I don't have money to pay you, Mr. Payne says, but if you come to London, I can pay you for the work you've done here too. Fausto accepts this offer as well. He had been away from home only a few times before, for example, when responding to a school obligation, he was sent to the Campicultura, a month of work in Vord picking cerise. With courage and a lack of experience, he sets off for England. London 1947. The stained glass windows, once the pride of the cathedral, were shattered, their empty sockets gazing in incredulity at the cruelty of war and humanity. St. Paul's presented itself to visitors thus in 1947. The signs of destruction still lingered, despite the English efforts to revive their capital. The rubble had been cleared from the streets, but the chasms that yawned between them remained. Those wounds would take time to heal. The cathedral, though its windows were shattered, had withstood the German bombs, but around it lay a desolate landscape. For 500 meters, there was nothing, no city. London was like this, patchy and fragmented, as if the bombs had delighted in disrupting the continuity of the urban network, leaving space for new development to emerge. It was thus that London welcomed Fausto upon his arrival from Chiasso. More than the spectacle of the megalopolis's vastness compared to Chiasso, it was the scale of war he had not seen but only heard about, feared but never experienced. He was just 16 years old and wandered through the city, curious about everything, especially the language he didn't know. There had been a degree of recklessness, he often thought so himself, in embarking on this journey with so few references. He knew nothing about Britain, only a handful of English words, but felt Chiasso couldn't be his horizon. So, when Mr. Payne proposed that he follow him, Fausto didn't think much of it. He hadn't thought and wasn't surprised by the proposal. It all began when Professor Muschietti told him, there's an Englishman here in Chiasso who has business in Switzerland but doesn't speak Italian or German and struggles with French. He needs a bright young lad to do some errands for him and help with languages. I thought of you. And so, Fausto met the man and started working for him that summer. He enjoyed running around doing odd jobs, in customs, at the post office, writing commercial letters, translating, and interpreting. Fausto didn't speak English, but this other fellow only spoke English. However, over time, they learned to understand each other by inventing a sort of Esperanto, known only to them. And so, that summer passed with Fausto doing his first apprenticeship in the world of logistics. The war in Europe had just ended, and goods were starting to circulate again with some intensity. Switzerland, having remained outside the conflict, was an excellent hub between north and south, east and west. Its infrastructure was intact across the continent, its banks a safe haven, and its people reliable. All around them lay countries needing everything to rebuild their industries, feed families, and fill in the gaps left by bombs with houses, palaces, and streets. Chiasso was one of the main gates through which goods passed, for Italy and from Italy, Britain towards the rest of Europe, and Europe towards Britain and the United States. Mr. Payne knew this could be a good place for business and was exploiting it. He had arrived in Chiasso during the war to try to keep his logistics company running despite the difficult times. Now, however, it was time to return home. There was much to do, life was taking on new energy, and from afar, it would be hard to manage affairs properly. It was time to go back home. But that bright young lad who knew several languages and wasn't afraid of anything could be very useful. So, he said, "Why don't you come with me to London? There, you'll learn even more about this trade, and you'll pick up English, a language that will always be useful." The boy didn't need convincing and accepted. He didn't even ask for permission at home. At 16, he was considered an adult, and no one opposed his decision. After all, those were times when people grew up quickly. The day of departure arrived. His mother prepared to accompany him to the station. She wouldn't see him again for who knows how long, and even receiving news from him would be difficult. Unmindful of this, insensitive to the cruelty that can come with being 16, "Mum, I'm going alone," you'll cry, "and it bothers me." And he left home. Over 70 years on, that prohibition imposed by his mother still weighs heavily on his heart. Childhood of a leader. In the early days of 47, Fausto had returned from London, just long enough to sort out his papers for emigration and visit his family before setting off again. He was only 17 years old and, although he had an experience that few of his contemporaries had lived through, which had suddenly propelled him onto the cusp of adulthood, he still remained a boy with all the passions, carefree spirit, and desire to have fun that came with it. Among these passions, mountaineering held a predominant position. The Zurich Mountains had been his first training ground when, in the summer, his maternal aunt's husband would rent a chalet somewhere and Fausto would be invited to stay for a few days. His uncle would take him along and they would set off on long hikes that could last for 2 days. In their backpacks were the essentials for survival: food, shelter. There were mountain huts and refuges. It was the late 1930s and Fausto was still just a young lad, but those hikes had left an indelible mark on him. The enchanting Zurich Mountains, the Flumserberg with its Whalen Lake, the Lagan, the Pfannenstiel, and others had etched themselves into his memory. So too had the pleasure of reaching those summits, a feeling that never faded. In England he had to put this passion aside, but now that he was back in Chiasso, the desire had returned stronger than ever. Convinced that everything remained as it once was, he re-established contact with the explorers of Chiasso. However, things had changed. The Chiasso section was now inactive and there were no longer any young people enrolled in the association. Fausto set to work, pessimism of reason, optimism of will, yes, because there might still be someone who wanted to revive the explorator's experience. It was all to be seen. Since he had left, more than a year had passed, an era had changed. The war that had ravaged half the world, leaving Switzerland miraculously intact, had created an insatiable desire for life, for doing things, for growing up. Those who had been left as boys had grown up, not so much physically but mentally, and were almost men. Chiasso seemed more than any other town to be depleted of young people, who had gone to the Swiss interior in search of work. There were few youngsters who wanted to get together to form an explorators group. Fausto's idea could have been a good one, but it came too late and seemed that no one was interested in discovering San Giorgio, Generoso, Bisbino, as if there was no longer any need to climb, to spend the day together, as if everyone already knew everything. And Fausto didn't understand this. He tried to organize hikes, launch a new recruitment campaign, but despite his efforts he was unable to gather more than 4 or 5 old friends around him. He had to rely on the organization in Mendrisio. There the group could count on over 80 members, a far cry from the handful of Chiassese. But even this solution didn't last long. They were all penniless and couldn't scrape together the few pounds needed for the hikes they wanted to organize. Fausto's first attempt at becoming a leader was not as successful as he had hoped, but it was in those times that lasting friendships began to form. Dolce Vita in London. Riding horses, playing squash, attending receptions. For Fausto, glamorous London had opened its arms wide. He wasn't exactly brilliant at riding, but he wasn't afraid, a feeling he'd only experienced a few times in his long life, and his hosts, with their typically British delicacy, tactfully assigned him gentle animals to ride. And although he wasn't a champion squash player, the sport was hardly popular across the Channel at that time. His youth and natural aptitude for sports helped him hold his own. But it hadn't always been like this. London had taken some time to welcome Fausto with open arms, especially when it came to the exclusive clubs and high society residencies. At first, things were tough. Whenever he wasn't working or in the evenings studying English at a language school, Fausto spent most of his free time alone. Sundays were long, but his frugal nature meant he only occasionally ventured into a pub for a pint. It was during this period that the Olympics arrived, and it seemed like the perfect opportunity to have some fun. From the 29th of July to the 14th of August, 1948, over 4,000 athletes from 59 countries would compete in the most spectacular sports events, an event that hadn't taken place since the war, 12 years earlier. London had been chosen as the host city by the Olympic Committee, coinciding with Fausto's arrival in the city. It was a stroke of good fortune. This historic event marked a return to normal life for the world after the great tragedy, and it would be even better than before. The Olympics were a perfect representation of the values they embodied, rich in symbolic choices. The previous edition had taken place in Berlin, while this time London, the city that had been the first, most tenacious, and implacable adversary, was center stage. Germany and Japan weren't among the participating countries because they hadn't yet earned their place alongside other nations who had suffered at their hands. It was a moment not to be missed, especially for a young and enthusiastic person like Fausto. However, there was one catch: attending the events required a ticket. Fausto would have loved to watch one of the many thrilling football matches but soon realized that buying a ticket to Wembley Stadium was out of his budget. He looked for something more affordable. In the end, he opted for cycling, not because it particularly interested him, but because it was the only event that didn't require a ticket. On the 14th of August, 1948, at Windsor Park, Fausto watched José Biet, an unexpected French gold medalist, amidst the cheering crowd of spectators. Disappointed by his countryman's performance, the best Italian athlete had finished 13th. Fausto was still part of this vibrant London society. 20 years later, when Fausto arrived in London again, this time at Heathrow Airport, things were very different. Thanks to friendships and respect he'd earned through his straightforward and calm business approach, many doors were now open to him, even those leading to the highest echelons of British power. He had two mentors who helped guide him through this journey. The first was Len Payne, the man who brought Fausto to England. A skilled entrepreneur who found a suitable location for doing business in wartime Chiasso, Payne was a conservative and a staunch supporter of the Tory party, with little patience for communists or left-wing ideologies. His anger was palpable when Winston Churchill, the winner over the Nazis, lost the 1945 elections to the Labour Party. From him, Fausto learned to share his disdain for communism, but, more importantly, he acquired the essential British social etiquette, those conventions and mannerisms necessary for navigating high society. However, it was John Sommer who had a far greater influence on Fausto's development and growth. A wealthy entrepreneur whose capital helped establish Cippà Trasporti, Sommer took a liking to the young Swiss businessman and offered him valuable advice throughout his life. In Sommer, Fausto found not only a business partner but also a true friend, one who extended beyond their personal relationship to involve their families. Wally loved attending dinner parties at the Sommers and was always happy to reciprocate when they visited Chiasso for work or on their way to the Alps or Italy for vacation. Fausto and John formed a strong bond, despite their age difference. They developed a deep understanding of each other's needs and preferences, so much so that Fausto would often cover for Sommer whenever he disappeared with a woman for an extended period. Sommer was known to be involved in high society scandals, including the infamous Profumo affair, which raised suspicions about his involvement in espionage and romantic entanglements. Not a fruit nor of vegetables. It's time to go home. Fausto feels it. England is beautiful and he has seen as much of it as his meager salary from Mr. Payne allowed him to. Brighton, Canterbury, Wales. The war has left its scars everywhere, but the landscape is still fascinating. The sparkling green of the fields, the rolling hills, the thatched cottages, the peaceful countryside all contrast with the imperial swagger of certain London streets which even the fiercest Nazi bombing raids have failed to erase completely. London is beautiful. Here he met dozens of people, had many relationships, some that lasted only a night, others more romantic. But it's time to go home. Fausto knows this and has made up his mind. What could Chiasso possibly offer him? It's just a small border town and the leap would be great, perhaps traumatic for him who has lived in the capital of the empire for 4 years, even if he had to endure the humiliation of India's independence recently. "I'm going home," he said one morning to Mr. Payne as he entered the man's office where he had discovered the world. Mr. Payne, a true Briton, didn't bat an eyelid or show any emotion. All the reluctance that Mr. Payne felt at this announcement, Fausto measured from the words that followed, "If you've made up your mind, it's fine. I'm sure you don't want to cause any trouble for me and the organization, so let me find someone to replace you. As soon as I have a bit of time for the young replacement to learn the ropes, and then you'll be free to go where you please." As soon as he finished speaking in a tone that sounded like a sentence, Mr. Payne put down his pipe on the desk, put on his glasses again and went back to writing the interrupted letter. The signal was clear. Mr. Payne considered this brief and unpleasant conversation over. Fausto left and slowly, as he made his way to his office, began to realize the perfidy hidden in Mr. Payne's response. It would be Mr. Payne who would decide when the young man could leave. What had given that little impudent foreigner the idea of being master of his own destiny? Well, whatever the origin of this presumptuous illusion was, things were now back to normal. The fact is, however, that once Fausto has an idea in his head, it's very difficult to get it out of there unless it's impossible. The boy is mild, but determined. The call of home has been calling him for a while now, almost 4 years have passed since he left. It's true that he had returned a couple of times before, but only for short periods, just long enough to sort out some bureaucratic issues. The first time was just a month after his arrival in London. On that occasion it was the fault of the visa and on other occasions only for some holidays. Now home really felt like it was missing. What could Chiasso possibly offer him? He didn't know, but he wasn't afraid of the future, nor had he ever been. Something would turn up, something would be invented. He had learned a job well, was proficient in foreign languages and still had plenty of energy and willpower. What he lacked were the mountains, the fresh air, the clear skies and the water of the Ticino streams. In short, he missed the scent of home. He was tired of London, its smog, grey sky and rain. Between him and Chiasso there now stood the condition, or curse, imposed by Mr. Payne. There was only one way to get around it. A phone call arrived unexpectedly. "Gianni, it's Fausto." "Yes, I'm calling from London, so don't keep me on for too long as it costs me a fortune. Listen, I want to go home to Chiasso. What do you think about coming to London and taking my place with Mr. Payne?" His brother was taken aback, didn't even have time to catch his breath or ask any of the many questions that were crowding his throat before Fausto had hung up. Then he thought, he himself couldn't see spending all his life on Chiasso streets without having seen anything of the world and his brother's adventures in London. His stories, as little as Fausto spoke about himself and what he was doing there, had piqued his curiosity and sparked a bit of envy. And so he decided he would join his brother in London. Maybe it could work. The two brothers swapped places and Fausto thus secured the possibility of returning to Chiasso. Brothers, after all, are never alike, no matter how much they come from the same womb and seed, and the swap didn't quite work out. The new Cippà never got into sync with Payne or the rest of the organization, and the experiment only lasted long enough for Fausto to lose his taste for that experience completely. It wasn't just the distance from Ticino that had tired him out, it was the job itself, clearing fruit and vegetables all day, that failed to inspire him. He made another attempt. "I'm leaving," he said. And once again the response was the same: "First find someone to replace you." He didn't have another brother to propose the swap to, so the search was more complicated because in Chiasso no one seemed willing to cross the channel for what many saw as a too daring an adventure. And think about it, by 1951, the war seemed forgotten and London, now victorious, was experiencing rapid rebirth. The Marshall Plan had poured billions into the country and the economy was changing the face of the capital, which was now very different from the one Fausto had known on his first arrival in '46 when destruction was its most dramatic and characteristic feature. London was once again becoming the proud capital of a great economic power. Similarly, Fausto struggled hard to find among the young people of Chiasso someone who had the desire and courage. It would have taken much less than what had driven Fausto years before to climb onto the train that from Zurich station would deposit him at Victoria station. But in order to be free, Fausto would have gone to the devil himself to find someone to take his place. And if not to the devil, the young Cippà had to really put up a fight and finally decided to ask around everywhere, even boys who weren't part of his circle or close friends. It wasn't easy, but in the end he found one and Fausto was free at last. Finally, he wouldn't have to deal with clearing fruit and vegetables, his obsession, unless occasionally. A question of tifo. He felt that life in London was starting to feel claustrophobic. Not so much the social scene, which he still enjoyed. The girls weren't in short supply on Sundays. Besides the pub, he'd attend sports events, of which the city had no shortage. Good morning, sir. I'd like a ticket for today's match. Hey lad, where are you from? You're not from London, are you? No, sir, I'm Swiss. And why do you want to watch a match here at Highbury? Because I love football and support Arsenal. Excellent, lad. Spot on, here are 2 tickets for you and your friend, courtesy of Arsenal for 2 fans from beyond the M25. And see if you can bring us some luck, it's going to be tough today. That time he got away with it, but Fausto didn't have the same reception at subsequent events, perhaps because that day he hadn't brought any good fortune or maybe because he couldn't find someone as welcoming at the ticket office. Sundays at the stadium became a rare treat due to the expense of tickets for his modest finances. What was starting to get on his nerves was work and, although it pained him to admit it, being away from home and family. And the mountains. Yes, he missed the mountains, not that the countryside around London wasn't green and beautiful, but it was around London. Looking out of his office or home window, he couldn't see them, nor could he when walking through the streets. In Chiasso, on the other hand, there wasn't a spot, position, window, or street corner from which you wouldn't see the mountain peaks. The Generoso and Senri, the Tamaro, Lima, and towards Italy, Grigna and Legnun, and further north, in the distance, the Gottardo and San Bernardino. No need to invent anything on Sundays, just grab your backpack, put 2 sandwiches and some fruit inside, you can find water along the way, and set off with the right shoes on your feet, a sweater, and a windbreaker. Climb up those trails, cross the steep green meadows that get drenched by morning dew droplets, stop every now and then to catch your breath under the pretext of taking in the view. Sundays are filled this way, no need for anything else. It's that desire that drives him to write. Dear Sir, I've been working in London for almost 4 years now at an important English shipping company. Here I've gained a lot of experience because I've handled many tasks and had the chance to see various aspects of this job. I feel ready to take on new activities and bring my experience to other organizations. Since I'd like to return to living in Switzerland, I'm asking if your company has any available positions that I could utilize with my experience. Danzas, the large international shipping company Fausto's letter was addressed to, replied promptly that they were interested in a figure like young Cippà and, on his part, he made use of this interest to ask for a considerable salary. To his happy surprise, the response was once again positive. Fausto could return home, to Chiasso, and its mountains. But it wouldn't last long. Danzas had other plans for him. After a brief period at home, spent shuttling between Chiasso, Milan, Rome, Como, and other Italian cities, came the new proposal, Mr. Cippà, what do you say if we send you to one of our offices in Germany for a while? We really need someone like you there. He mentioned it to his family, as he had done before, and there were no objections, although nobody can say what went through his mother's heart. To justify leaving home again, Fausto said, "It's a great career opportunity. They'll pay me 750 francs a month." "Good for you," his father said with admiration. "You're almost doubling my salary." Those words, spoken in admiration by the father, sounded like a slap to Fausto, who felt ashamed. The money was welcome, though, and since it was paid out in Chiasso, his mother would take 200 francs and send them to him in Germany, putting the rest aside for when he'd return home or for any family emergencies that might arise. Meanwhile, in Germany, Fausto's life took a new turn. New girls, new friends, new things to learn, a new boss and new work rhythms. "Fausto, off you go now, we'll see each other at the office at 8 p.m. But I have a date tonight, I won't be able to make it back to the office. There's a lot of work to do here and I want to review some documents with you. We'll see each other at 8 p.m. Without waiting for an answer, Mr. Heller left, leaving Fausto no choice but to show up at the office as scheduled. That conversation was repeated almost word for word throughout Fausto's time in Germany, and it was his body that paid the price. His sleep hours suffered, not those spent having fun. He'd finish work around midnight and then rush off to join his friends at a local pub until nearly dawn, only to show up at the office ready to start again. Only 20-year-old Fausto could handle such rhythms, but they couldn't last. His body put its foot down, and it was a harsh and long-lasting break. The magic of Venice came at a price for young Fausto, and his downfall was a plate of mussels served up in a beautiful trattoria behind San Marco where his boss had taken him while on a business trip to visit clients. Fausto felt unwell that night itself. He struggled back to Germany, where they hospitalized him a few days later with a diagnosis that would change his life: typhoid. 2 months in the hospital and 2 months of convalescence followed. The 54th year was not one to be remembered fondly by Fausto as he finally returned to Chiasso, fully recovered. Wally. The girl is beautiful. Very beautiful. And she also knows her way around the world. As young and reserved as she may seem, she immediately shows that she knows how to handle the conceited men who inevitably surround her. She is intelligent, and alert too. Perhaps she is not very precise, in fact, not at all. And an imprecise secretary is not exactly what a boss would want. Fausto is a young boss, but the girl is even younger, 7 years his junior, with a beautiful name that is perhaps a little too dainty. The name itself is not unusual. What is strange is the reason she was given it, in honor of Wally Simpson, the fascinating adventurer who, in the 1930 Sayuro, after having driven men mad with love and with 2 divorces behind her, scandalously married the heir to the British throne. Wally has nothing of the adventure about her and shares neither the glamour nor the easy life of Simpson. She was born Swiss, but her family has ancient Italian roots, from Seregno, and they have preserved one thing from those roots: living off furniture. Now they sell furniture rather than make it, and the shop is at the center of all the family's thoughts and feelings, especially since her father passed away and the weight of managing it fell onto her mother's shoulders. Wally is 4 years old, and for her, family means evening discussions between her mother and brother Sayuro's discussions and quarrels that always revolve around money. Therefore, she doesn't experience particular anguish when, at just 5 years old, she is sent to a boarding school in Bellinzona, and at 10 years old, to one in German-speaking Switzerland. There, she feels well because she is surrounded by the affection and attention that had perhaps been scarce in her life until then. And she will always feel a debt of gratitude for that affection and attention. When she meets Fausto, she is under 20 and wants to live. She has energy and determination. She believes she was invisible to adults, and now that she is an adult herself, she demands to be the center of attention. The letters her boss makes her write bore her, and the corrections and revisions are endless. Fausto is patient but also strict. Things must be done properly. So, Miss Wally, please rewrite this letter, and try to avoid errors, crossings out, and revisions, because clients must receive tidy letters. Fausto's interventions are always polite, and perhaps precisely for that reason, they hit their mark more effectively. They met at Danzas, one of the large shipping companies where he, despite his youth, holds a significant position. She is one of 30 girls who, according to the men in the company, are just looking for a husband. Wally is lively and charming, but working with her isn't easy. She makes many mistakes and gets angry when he tells her to rewrite letters full of corrections. This doesn't stop Fausto from making her redo them, whilst at the same time appreciating her character. And then, Wally is very pretty indeed, decidedly beautiful, with clear, highly expressive eyes. Fausto is not insensitive to feminine charm, and so he begins to court her. He remembers their first walk together well. She was exhausted because they had completed a long and steep climb so that he could show her what she called his possessions. For Wally even though she hadn't received much affection from her family of origin was equally proud of the social position it had given her. Their engagement lasted a year or less. I liked her, and I felt that the right moment had come to start a family, so I said, let's get married. Everyone gave their consent, Wally's mother and brothers, and Fausto's father. The only one with some doubts was Fausto's mother. She had nothing against Wally, but she feared that social differences might be an obstacle to their union. However, this proved not to be the case. While there were problems as there are for every couple over almost 70 years together they had different origins and motivations. Wally's mother, whilst consenting to the marriage, warned, keep her on a tight rein, she's capricious. You'll need patience. In the end, it's impossible to say which of the two had the most patience. Everything changes. The 60s and 70s. The world is in turmoil, once again. But this time, God willing, it is not war creating the chaos. At least, not in Europe. There is a war, but it is far away, in the Far East, and it is not entirely clear why. It shakes the consciences of Europeans, especially the young. Along with consciences, it also shakes habits, desires, and ways of life. There is something new in the air today, rather something ancient. Pascal's verse is perfectly suited to recount a 20-year period that contains within it all the new and all the ancient of the world. It seems that youth ferment is taking the lead, the flower children, the Beatles, peace and love, protests, the universities. Everything is changing, and that is the most evident part, the noisiest. Even in the schools of Ticino the winds of protest arrive. Beat music has its protagonists, guitar bands, drums, and musicians with bobbed hair, moustaches and long sideburns. In Lugano, there is no shortage of protest demonstrations complete with the Yankees Go Home and Power to the Workers placards. But if 20-year-olds seek space and demand a new leading role, society is built by the previous generation, those who were teenagers during the war, a generation that, above all, seeks well-being and stability for itself and its children. A solid and practical generation that envisions a Ticino more connected and open to the world. Thus the great road projects are born. The San Bernardino Tunnel is inaugurated in 1968, and in the same year work begins on the Gotthard Tunnel. Ticino, in short, draws closer to Switzerland by piercing the barrier of the Alps. It is the season of development, of income growth. It is the heart of what will be remembered as the Glorious 30, that is, a 30-year period, 45 to 75, of growing and widespread well-being. In the 1960s, the per capita income of the Ticinese more than doubled compared to 1950. Even though it is lower than the rest of the Confederation, the gap has shortened significantly. Ticino transforms from a land of emigration to a land of immigration. Italians crossing the border no longer aim to reach Zurich and Bern, they stop in Lugano, Locarno, Bellinzona. Most push themselves to provide manpower for the construction sites of the major roadworks. Others, the younger and more educated ones, begin to find places in services, banks, tourism, and in the clothing and mechanical industries, which in Ticino have taken over, displacing agriculture. Those with entrepreneurial ideas find space and nourishment for their ambitions. It is the right time to dare. The partner. A life together, and no one has ever seen or heard them argue. Two partners like that are rare. The winning idea was perhaps that of a precise division of roles and tasks. And of shares. A division of roles born naturally, without too much reasoning behind it. Fausto Cippà has always been a solid man, with a long, high gaze, capable of seeing far ahead and at the same time attentive to details. An entrepreneur, a worker, a man of few words. Calm. He says of himself, one of my flaws is a lack of communication. I have no dialectic, I don't know how to motivate others. Aldo Caro, his lifelong friend and partner, on the other hand, has his best qualities in exuberance and loquacity. A born salesman, Caro has been the commercial soul of Cippà Trasporti. His relationships have opened several paths for the company. Fausto and Aldo have known each other since they were boys. Besides, between Chiasso, where Fausto lives, and Berlerna, Aldo's village, there is a distance of less than 2 kilometers. They are both in the Explorers, as the secular scout group is called. They learn to appreciate each other and share adventures there, to know each other's strengths and weaknesses. Over time, they have built a sort of symbiotic relationship, Fausto the ability to be a calm and firm leader, Aldo the ability to involve others, to communicate. In the Explorers, these are skills needed to guarantee the whole group carefree days, fun, and safe excursions. In adult life they are equally useful to explore and traverse the business world, often harsher and more unpredictable than a mountain hike, avoiding falls or finding in the other the strength and confidence to resume the journey. Fausto's decision to go to London had separated them. Each had travelled a stretch of the road of life on their own. Fausto had toured Europe a bit, had worked in some large companies, had helped open branches of those companies in Italy, had learned languages well. Aldo had mostly stayed in Chiasso and from there had built solid relationships with Italian companies which, in the post-war period, were starting to produce again and needed to look to European countries, for which Chiasso was the most logical transit point. As a peasant proverb says, the wind does its rounds and everything returns, so Aldo and Fausto met again, this time not just for excursions, trips and evenings of food and fun. They met in their working lives, after all, both were involved in the same sector. But this time they met in an important adventure, both with prominent roles. Fausto is a partner in a shipping company and Aldo is one of its managers. We are at the end of the 1950s and the market has started to pull well again, in half of Europe, Italy, France, Great Britain, Germany, the Netherlands, Austria. American funding from the Marshall Plan had poured in and the European production system had started working again, and each country, while producing and exporting on one hand, imported on the other. So the circulation of goods had exploded dramatically and, consequently, shipping and the volume of customs paperwork in a Europe still heavily marked by customs barriers and state borders. If business is going well, the same cannot be said of relationships with the partner Risconi. As reflective and modest as Fausto is, the other is equally impetuous and leaves little decision-making room for Fausto. And Fausto suffers from it. Also because he sees things he doesn't quite like, business decisions he doesn't share. Fausto gradually matures the idea of leaving that experience to start his own. Not a simple decision that requires courage, capital, determination, contacts. He had been thinking about it for some time. Many times he was on the verge of taking flight. Every time, however, something happens that makes him give up. Every time he retraced his steps, it meant, he thought, that they weren't ready and the times weren't mature yet. Being in disagreement with the partner isn't enough to leave a functioning company to throw oneself into a venture that, despite being an expert in the sector by now, entailed uncertainties and risks. The opportunity came suddenly when he had almost shelved the idea. At the umpteenth choice of the partner neither discussed nor least of all shared, Fausto abandons all hesitation and, with the calm and determination that are his own, decides what steps to take. First of all, he involves his friend Aldo, shares the project with him and promises him a share in the new company. Aldo, who can't take it anymore either, accepts enthusiastically. If the potential clients are there, and the staff too, it's not the same for the capital needed to start up, guaranteeing the company the necessary breadth. Where to find it? Fausto has an idea. A crazy idea, but Fausto doesn't lack courage. The English friend. Having bosses wasn't in his nature. Until he was a young lad, he knew he had to put on a good face for bad times and win the trust of adults with his diligence and quick thinking. As he grew up, however, his spirit of independence, which made him love going on solo or group excursions in the Ticinese mountains, took over, driving him with increasing determination to build a future that relied solely on his own strengths and abilities. In every job he had, he tried to absorb everything that seemed useful and important: precision, accuracy, customs regulations, management techniques, organizational systems. even when he made mistakes, which was more often than not. But errors were the cement that gave his experience even greater solidity. It wasn't as if he'd always had the idea of becoming an entrepreneur. It was like a part of him that had grown without him noticing or nurturing it. It was a natural maturation process that he himself didn't fully understand and couldn't quite grasp, except perhaps because he'd always thought his father's life wouldn't be for him. His father, after all. He'd always felt affection and admiration for him, but also an inability to comprehend how he could have accepted spending his whole life in the shadow of the state, in a job that seemed identical every day of the year, every day of his life. Of his father Giovanni, Fausto had always appreciated his honesty and sobriety, an irreproachable border guard with a strong sense of duty. He wasn't a man of many words, as befits someone who wears a uniform. In his son he placed great trust, seeing him as serious and level-headed. That's why, even though in private he wasn't entirely happy about it, he accepted Fausto's decision to follow Mr. Payne to London when he was just 16 years old. He'd reassured Rita, his wife, Fausto knows what he wants, even if he's only 16. He knows what he wants and is prudent. He won't get into trouble. And one thing's for sure, he doesn't want to spend the rest of his life doing what we've done. Now, many years on, Fausto felt it was time to try something more, not that he hadn't already had a decent career, but he wasn't satisfied with being under someone else's thumb all the time. He didn't have the capital to start his own business. His most valuable asset was the network of contacts and relationships he'd built up over the years. He'd traveled extensively throughout Europe, meeting people in almost every country who'd done business with him, or rather, with his employers. It was now time for Fausto to make those good deals all by himself. But connections are a valuable asset when the company exists and they help it run smoothly. Before that, you need money to set it up, and he didn't have enough of that. Or at least not enough, because Fausto didn't want his family, which had grown by 3 more children thanks to Wally, to suffer any hardship. He needed money to turn his dream into reality. And if you don't have the cash, you need to go where it is. Banks were the logical choice, especially since there weren't short of them in Ticino. Fausto visited several. The officials were courteous and formal, listening, asking questions, then with equal courtesy and formality shaking their heads, listing interest rates, conditions, and showing him the door. This had happened once, twice, 3 times. The modus operandi might change slightly, but the outcome was always the same. It wasn't a pleasant feeling to be rejected, especially by bank officials who didn't know how to look beyond the tip of their noses, bound by directives from above without any autonomy to use their own judgment. Some were evasive and cold, hiding behind a few words, procedures, capacity, guarantees. Others told him straight out, "Your project seems promising and credible, you're a serious and reliable person, but our institute's guidelines are clear-cut, we can't bend them. Sorry, Mr. Cippà, our bank can't help you." The disappointment was bitter and the situation slightly humiliating. Evidently it wasn't yet his time, his project would have to wait. Fausto went back to his old life. He'd travel around, doing business for others as usual. He often visited Britain. By now he spoke the language fairly well, and it was always him who got assigned tasks that required English skills. "Good morning, Mr. Cippà." John Sommer greeted him with his own special way of pronouncing his surname, which must have seemed very strange to him. A very British man and a wealthy one at that, owner of a highly respected shipping company in his country and half of Europe, he knew how to be charming because despite his aristocratic bearing he was very affable. His manner put Fausto at ease straight away, even though they'd just met. This man had a way of being that made you feel comfortable, almost on familiar terms. "How are business affairs going, Mr. Sommer?" "Well," Fausto asked him, and then continued, "As for me, I'm a bit down in the dumps because I've been wanting to strike out on my own for ages, but the banks back home don't want to help me." That's how their conversation started, as an outpouring of his frustration, during which Fausto told him about his disappointment, and then they went on to talk about business opportunities, market trends in Europe, the prospects for Italy and Switzerland. They chatted for 2 days, starting with a general discussion that became increasingly specific and precise. Fausto found himself almost by chance developing his project during those 2 London days. Mr. Sommer, against all expectations, agreed he'd put up some of the capital to finance Cippà Trasporti S.A.'s startup. In exchange, he wanted to have a majority stake in the company, an unacceptable condition for Fausto because it would mean having another boss. Partners, yes, but never bosses again, that was Fausto's mantra. And in the end he won. Cippà Trasporti could finally be born. Fausto could smile and head back home. London had marked his destiny for the second time. He would provide a portion of the capital to finance the launch of Cippà Trasporti S.A. In return, he asked for a majority stake in the compagnie Euros, an unacceptable condition for Fausto, as it would mean having a boss once again. Partners, yes, bosses, never again, this was Fausto's fixed principle. In the end, he won out. Cippà Trasporti could finally be born. Fausto could smile and return home. For the second time, London had sealed his destiny. The adventure begins. The day is mild, rather humid, with a light breeze descending from the Alps. There are few people on the streets. The drizzle does not invite an outdoor stroll, but not even the heaviest rain of the century could have deterred the 3 men ringing the bell at Dr. Graziano Papa's notary office in Chiasso. For 2 of them, it is an important day, a Euro too important. Fausto and Aldo are about to bring to life the idea that has occupied their minds and been the subject of their discussions for months, indeed years, leading up to this day. There is nothing heroic about founding a new business, but when signing the Articles of Association, a mixture of apprehension and excitement is more than natural. After all, there is a certain solemnity in the word Euro, strictly handwritten Euro, with which the document opens, in the name of the Lord, the year 1967, this Thursday, the 2nd day of the month of March, in Chiasso. Before me personally appeared Fausto Cippà, son of Giovanni from Bellinzona, Aldo Carasquared, son of Giovanni from Chiasso a Euro. Thus, Cippà Trasporti S.A. is officially born. But alongside these men who are about to enter and sign the Articles of Association for a new company, there is virtually another who is not physically present, yet without whom this day might not have unfolded in the same way. Although he was far away from Chiasso, John Sommer, a seasoned entrepreneur, was experiencing that moment in his London office with a mixture of curiosity and paternalism towards that Swiss man of not even 40 who had appeared one day in his London offices and, in good English a Euro, despite them hardly knowing each other, Euros had asked him for the capital to open his company, offering him in return nothing more than an absolute minority stake. But he had liked the man immediately for that very reason. It might have seemed like naivety, and in that case, it would have been a negative trait, because naivety does not suit a good entrepreneur, but in reality, it was sincerity, combined with an awareness of his own ability to inspire trust. And this quality, now put to the test, had convinced Sommer to wager a substantial sum on his company. At the close of the first financial year Euros in October 1968, one of the most iconic years of the second half of the century Euro, Sommer's money seemed decidedly well invested. The commentary accompanying the financial statements of Cippà Trasporti S.A. reads, "It has been possible to start working immediately, having an already active core of clients and trained staff, so no preparatory work was necessary. Until September, however, we operated without margins. The future is positive because the current staff is capable of sustaining a 50% increase in workload without this leading to a significant rise in general costs. In short, the company's setup was good, a very lean, flexible structure, made up of high-quality individuals with considerable experience and professionalism already under their belts, who, as soon as the company opened, began churning out work. After all, a portion of the first client stemmed from the reliability and good relationships that Carasquared on one hand, and Cippà on the other, had managed to build. The team is small but trusted and close-knit. Among them is Lupi, an Italian who began crossing the border to work at 15. When Cippà asked him, "Will you come with me?" he asked only one question: "Who else is coming with you?" Upon hearing the list of people who would follow Cippà and Carasquared, his response was clear: "All right, I'll come, they are people I like." No negotiations, no requests for money. This is how Cippà Trasporti was born, from mutual trust and a desire to take on a leading role firsthand. The following year, the positive trend continued. The situation was decidedly encouraging. In particular, exports from Italy towards Northern Europe had grown, especially in the first half of the year. After all, the companies of the so-called industrial triangle, Milan, Genoa, Turin, were experiencing the final glimmers of a particularly fortunate season that began in the mid-1950s and lasted for over 12 or 13 years. From the warehouses that had first dotted and then almost covered that plain triangle emerged products of decent quality and excellent price, for which Europe was hungry. Chiasso is the key transit hub, and here Cippà Trasporti puts its experience and reliability at the service of its clients. These qualities are appreciated by a constantly growing clientele. And a single hiccup is not enough to slow the pace or cool the partner's optimism. It's a pity, though, that Olivetti Euro, a truly beautiful name famous worldwide and a splendid calling card for a newly born Compagnia Euro, changed its operator. It is acceptable that something might not go perfectly. After all, price competition is becoming tight, and it is always possible to find someone offering a lower price. There is nothing to worry about, however. This small setback is amply compensated at least from an economic point of view, by new and more profitable relationships established with two major operators, one in Paris and the other in Amsterdam. On closer inspection, there is also something else that should cause some concern. Suddenly, in the second half of the year, let's say after the summer break, exports from Italy suffered a conspicuous slowdown. It would perhaps be more appropriate to speak of a collapse, but no one is calling things by their name just yet. It will pass, and everything will resume as before. Everyone says it was just a wave of strikes due to which a few too many working hours were lost in Italy. But these are protests that will be short-lived because the more hours of strike action taken, the less money is found in the pay packet. The workers will soon realize this and start working again as before, and perhaps even more. And with them, exports will resume, goods destined for Holland and Germany will once again crowd into Chiasso, the world will start marching again, and products will travel everywhere once more. And the ship sets sail. How is it going, Mr. Cippà? Where are you heading, Mr. Cippà? When will you stop, Mr. Cippà? Even if he had turned around and looked about, Fausto would not have been able to see who had asked him those pressing questions, one after the other, as if he were before a judge. No, there is no one, neither behind nor around him. They are inside his head. They are the questions that an entrepreneur constantly asks himself as soon as he has started his business, trying to find convincing answers. And Cippà is no different from others in this. He questions himself, tries to make forecasts, wishing he had a crystal ball to understand today what will become of Cippà Trasporti tomorrow, the company he recently founded. Sometimes he asks himself, but Mr. Cippà, what made you do it, Mr. Cippà, was it worth it? Yes, it was worth it, however it turns out, it was worth it. For 20 years his life has been adventurous, he might say. He experimented, seized the opportunities life presented to him almost without noticing, lightly and without fear. In his heart, he always thought that sooner or later he would build something of his own, and at that moment, adventure and recklessness would have to give way to awareness, and the desire to experiment to the solidity of experience. Now, on the threshold of 40, that something of his own has become a reality, there are people and families whose lives and well-being depend on that something. Fausto feels the weight of the responsibility. The first years of Cippà Trasporti's life were both exciting and difficult. The credibility gained over years of working for others' companies was a fundamental asset to begin with, but it certainly wasn't enough. Every day he had to sow seeds in new fields, hunting for new clients and new opportunities. Aldo lent a great hand too. Aldo Cara Squared, his lifelong friend. Fausto and he are a well-matched and complementary duo. In business, they work well together. But they also know how to enjoy themselves in their free time. Aldo takes care of the commercial side, Fausto has kept for himself since the majority of Cippà Trasporti is his, after the managerial, administrative, and financial responsibilities. And the consequent thoughts and worries. For now, however, positive thoughts prevail, business is getting into gear, Cippà is growing perhaps slowly, but growing. At the turning point of 1970, after 3 financial years, the balance sheet begins to be satisfactory. Shareholders, I am proud to inform you that Cippà Trasporti is experiencing a decidedly favorable period. The first few years were important for consolidating the structure, finding the best people, and refining the services. We managed to do all this in a short to mere euros, indeed, a very short to mere euros, and we reached the break-even point in just a couple of years. But these 1970s open under even better auspices, and even though last year, due to currency fluctuations, we encountered a few stumbles that were fortunately overcome without damage, for this year of 1972 I am happy to say, dear shareholders, that Cippà Trasporti SA, for the first time in its brief history, will be able to distribute dividends to you who had the courage and the desire to believe in this enterprise. Fausto's words, spoken with his usual calm and almost nonchalant tone of voice, initially produced no effect on the audience, simply because it took a couple of seconds for each of them to realize their meaning. The silence transformed into a warm round of applause, which cannot be described as thunderous because there were only 4 people present. In truth, that announcement, which seemed to herald a period of easy prosperity, was only partially fulfilled. While it is true that up until 1974 Cippà Trasporti enjoyed brilliant financial years and positive balance sheets, 74 itself marked a sharp halt. The long wave of trade union demands that had shaken the economy across Europe also made itself felt in the Confederation and, in particular, in Ticino, which suffered more than all the other cantons from what was happening in turbulent Italy. In a single stroke, labor costs jumped upwards by 20%. It was an upward leap that was difficult for any business to absorb, even more so for a company that, having been founded recently, did not yet have very deep foundations. The decision Fausto had to make was among the most painful of his life, making redundancies. It was a word he never wanted to inhabit his vocabulary, but the harshness of the situation, and even more so the suddenness with which it had manifested itself, made it inevitable. They proceeded with the utmost possible caution, as far as one can be cautious when taking away someone's livelihood. It was an unavoidable sacrifice because that dark year was followed by others that were not much better, but Cippà Trasporti was able to sail through with fewer problems, being leaner and lighter, until it reached the metaphorical sea of tranquility in 1978, when the results began to smile again and the company started to grow once more. Finally, Italy was painstakingly finding relative stability, both politically and paradoxically. The assassination of the Honourable Aldo Moro had marked the beginning of the end of the season of terrorismo and economically, so that companies in that country had started moving their goods towards other European countries again. At the same time, the efforts Cippà had initiated in previous years to diversify and expand its target market were bearing significant fruit. In particular, businesses in the canton of Ticino and other cantons had discovered the reliability of the Chiasso-based company. To the northern fair. The 2 men sit opposite each other at the restaurant table. Between them, though they finished lunch, the beer bottles, glasses, and other used crockery remain. It's a good restaurant, frequented by businessmen, and today it's particularly busy due to the trade fair drawing to a close. Fausto makes a little space on the table, moving the cluttering beer bottles, then takes a pen from one jacket pocket and his checkbook from the other, opening it carefully to ensure the tablecloth is clean. He looks at his dining companion and asks, "So, what figure should I write?" "Mr. Cippà, the figure we agreed upon." The pen begins to form the first number on the check, a 3. Again, Fausto pauses, raising his eyes with an interrogative look. "I said 30 million lire," is the clear response from the man opposite Cippà. Fausto resumes writing, stopping at each number with the all-too-clear expectation that his interlocutor will accept and agree to a slightly lower, round figure than what was agreed. But the man is unmoved by this pantomime, and without showing either amusement or irritation, he continues to repeat, right to the end, 30 million lire, not a penny less, not a penny more. Though defeated in that negotiation, Fausto certainly couldn't say he was unhappy with the day's business. It had been the last day of the Hanover Fair, an event that had proven to be a truly interesting opportunity, pregnant with positive consequences for Cippà Trasporti. It had all started almost by chance, or rather, through one of those fortunate opportunities that Fausto knew how to seize. A friend, Roberta from Haute, years earlier, had found a new contact, but it involved speaking German, a language of which he didn't know a single word. It was for this reason that, albeit reluctantly, he was forced to pass the opportunity to Cippà. That contact had now resurfaced, paving the way for Cippà Trasporti to the Hanover Fair. This fair had been a symbol of Germany's rebirth after the devastation of the war. Opened in 1947, it quickly became the largest exhibition center in the world, dedicated particularly to the mechanical industry and, later, to technological innovation. "Dear Fausto," he had said, "in a few months, the new edition of the Hanover Fair, one of Europe's most important, will open. I'd like to do it with you because I trust you and because you're an expert in transport from Italy, and there are many Italian factories here in Hanover." Cippà had replied with his usual honesty, "I've never done any, but I like the idea, and I think my setup is capable of doing a good job." "Excellent," the other said, "I'll send you the list of Italian companies that exhibited at the previous edition. Then it will be your job to convince them to entrust us with the transport." There were indeed many Italian companies on that list. On the other hand, the devaluation of the lira facilitated Italian exports, and rightly so, many were taking advantage. Fausto had written to all of them, presenting Cippà Trasporti, its services, and the agreement with the Germans that would make reaching Hanover trouble-free. If not all, many, the majority, had welcomed Cippà's offer and entrusted their precious cargo to them. It had taken 30 lorries to bring the machinery to be exhibited from all over Italy, and few, very few, would have been capable of getting 30 lorries from Italy to Hanover in a week without delays or hitches. And it was those 30 lorries, outbound and return, that Fausto was settling at the restaurant table, signing the check amidst the recently consumed beer bottles. Even though the sum was substantial and the German hadn't budged a single penny, Fausto was satisfied not only because the profit was good, but above all because, as he later told his staff, "We've learned a new trade and discovered a lucrative market we'd never thought of, which will help us overcome the difficulties of these years." And as sometimes happened to him, he had been prophetic. The exhibition business, wonderfully expanding in those years and up to 2000, would prove to be one of the most powerful factors in Cippà Trasporti's success. Beyond the Alps. The 1980s. The beauty of Canton Ticino also contained its limitations. What a 19th-century anarchist song hailed with the poignant line, "Farewell, snow-white Ticinese mountains," had long represented the border between the canton and the rest of the Confederation, an obstacle that wasn't insurmountable, but certainly not easy to traverse. Perhaps even more than physical, it was primarily a psychological boundary. A boundary that also marked an otherness from the rest of the country, which the Ticinese both suffered from and took pride in, feeling part of the culture and lifestyle they shared with Italy. However, in the long run, this border had weighed on the canton's development, in terms of relationships and business with the pulsating heart of the Confederation, rightly considered the gateway to Northern Europe. At the turn of the 1970s and 1980s, this barrier was finally breached. The first to fall was the San Bernardino, which, as early as 1967, had added a motorway tunnel to its railway tunnel, facilitating a flow of both tourist and goods traffic that would soon render its dimensions insufficient. But it was in 1980, with the inauguration of the 17-kilometer tunnel through the Gotthard, that the canton definitively connected with inner Switzerland and Northern Europe. It was a change of perspective, a further step towards integration with the rest of the Confederation, and particularly with German-speaking Switzerland. Zurich and Bern became closer. Above all, it became easier to look towards the whole of Europe, journeys became faster, and new possibilities and opportunities opened up for entrepreneurs with drive and courage. And Ticino changed its skin, even though agriculture remained by far the predominant occupation and economic activity in the canton for much of the 1960s, due to both a milder climate protected by the Alpine chain and federal measures during the Second World War that had encouraged even small-scale cultivation. By the 1970s there had already been a partial transformation leading to a significant growth in the manufacturing sector. This growth had concerned sectors with neither a high rate of innovation nor high investment, such as clothing, but in any case, the necessary infrastructure had begun to be strengthened, and an industrial entrepreneurial culture had started to spread throughout the territory. Then, the oil crisis struck, inevitably slowing development and costing over 300,000 jobs in industry. And, as if that weren't enough, the Swiss economy, and particularly that of Ticino, suffered the further blow of the collapse of the Italian lira's value, which reduced its competitiveness in international markets. Fortunately, the 1980s opened with very different prospects. The very critical issues of the previous decade suggested a different approach. Ticino chose to adopt a new vocation, and the recovery took on new characteristics. Traditional, low-value-added activities gave way to more innovative ones. The social physiognomy of the canton itself changed, an educated middle class grew rapidly, while economically, financial services, managerial services, and consultancy largely established themselves. This transformation was intelligently accompanied and fostered by a set of cantonal laws designed to encourage innovation, electronics, and the computerization of processes. It was a path that Cippà Trasporti would also want to embark on. Women. Wally only saw him in the evenings, when he returned home. The children, who had already eaten and were in their pajamas, would cling to his legs, and he would playfully drag them around the house. The game would soon end, amidst the children's complaints, when Fausto, with the little ones hanging from his knees, pretending to be a giant, would carry them to their bedroom. A few more protests, a few shouts from Wally, "Go to bed, leave Daddy alone, he hasn't eaten yet," and then the little ones, in age order, would more or less docilely climb into their beds. When Fausto came home, this scene was pretty much the same every evening. When he came home, that is, because there were evenings when he returned much later or didn't come home at all, carried away by business matters but also by a bit of carousing with his old friends. Wally only saw him in the evenings. Even holidays, most of the time, she took alone with the children. She would go to Girone for almost the entire summer with the children every year as soon as school finished, but Fausto would only join them occasionally for the weekend, as he preferred to stay in Chiasso to oversee the company, which never stopped. It was a tacit agreement. He would look after the business and ensure a certain level of comfort, while she would look after the family, raising the children as befitted a respectable Ticinese family, sparing her husband the hassles and pitfalls of daily life. A common agreement in many families, a traditional division of labor in the canton, and in many other parts of the world, in those 1970s. In the Cippà family, this agreement was perhaps interpreted with a few too many excesses. "Anna, from next month, you'll be going to college, in central Switzerland," Wally told her middle daughter. And Anna, who in her heart had long dreaded that sentence, felt herself falter. She had hoped until the last, but she knew perfectly well that it was a misplaced hope. Besides, she didn't have the character of her older sister, Roby, who had managed to stand up to their mother and had refused with all her might to go to boarding school. But, as everyone knows, Roby was a rebel by nature. Anna, on the other hand, was not. In fact, she was docile. And going to college wasn't a punitive measure, just as it wouldn't have been for Roberta. It was simply that a respectable Chiasso family had to care about their children's education, and this meant, among other things, attending a good college in central Switzerland. It meant, for example, learning the 3 national languages, which was decidedly important for someone born in Ticino. Andrea also went to college, and he wasn't happy about it at all. Although, in hindsight, he might describe it as one of the most useful life experiences he'd had, and being away from his family, once he went to secondary school, didn't weigh on him much. But, Anna thought, Andrea was an independent spirit, not rebellious like Roby, but someone who liked to mind his own business and live free from overly close ties. Wally, their mother, kept repeating that college was the only place where she had truly been happy as a girl, where she had felt loved, appreciated, and cherished. For her, Anna, however, it was all different. She loved Chiasso, she loved her home, she loved her family. Of course, it wasn't all roses. With Roby, for one thing, they didn't get along very well. In short, Anna didn't want to go to college, but Wally was unyielding, and Anna went to college. There would be endless tears, but they were useless. Fausto said nothing throughout all of this. After all, Fausto was a man of few words, and no one expected him to say anything. The family was Wally's domain, the family was a woman's affair. "Roby is a problem, she worries me." "Why?" "Because she's stubborn and rebellious. She does what she wants, she hangs out with people not from our circle, she has 1,000 ideas in her head but it's not clear what she really wants to do." "So what do you plan to do?" Fausto's unenthusiastic question had been. "I've tried everything, but there's no way. Besides, she and I don't get along at all, whatever I say, she just shrugs. The school she chose isn't right for her, now she says she can't stand children and certainly doesn't plan to spend her life looking after other people's. In short, I really don't know what to do." The conversation had taken place with the lights off, when the children were asleep, and Wally could exchange a few words with her husband, who, for his part, paid only relative attention to these nocturnal conversations. Not that he didn't care about his children's future, but on the one hand, he thought his main duty was to ensure their well-being. On the other, he believed Wally was much better suited and more capable than him to oversee their education. And above all, he was convinced that each of them would find their own way. Even the rebellious Roberta, who, while attending teacher training college, had realized she wasn't cut out for working with such young children. Nor was she interested. "You'll be happy now that I've got my diploma," Roberta announced decisively to her parents. "But let it be clear that I have no intention of doing that job straight away. First, I want to go to England to learn English properly. After all, you went too, Dad, in much harder times than these." Learning English properly was an excellent motivation, but Roberta knew perfectly well that it wasn't what truly drove her. She knew there was a vacant position waiting for her at the Chiasso nursery school, and it was precisely from that prospect that she wanted to escape. And London seemed like a good place to go, with all the ferment stirring in that city. For once, her father intervened directly. "Good, that sounds like a good idea." So Roberta left to become an au pair in London. Even if it was no longer the swinging London of the 60s, it was still a reality rich in stimuli, opportunities, and things at least a decade ahead of Ticino. A year in the whirlwind of London life, then the inevitable return home. The words with which her mother greeted her once the customary celebrations were over were very clear. As if a year hadn't passed or had only been a brief interlude, life was resuming exactly where it had left off on the day of her departure. "Now you speak English perfectly, I hope. So you've achieved your goal. All that's left is for you to start working. That position at the nursery school hasn't been filled yet, so." She hadn't even waited for her daughter's reply. She had taken charge of the situation herself, gathered the documentation, and submitted the application. The school's response was not long in coming. "Hired. What bad luck, they've taken me part-time." Roberta announced her hiring with these words, but the interpretation the two women gave it was diametrically opposed. Roberta was disappointed to have been chosen. Wally was disappointed that her daughter had only been hired part-time. But even if Roberta wasn't aware of it, an extraordinary opportunity was opening up for her. "Dad, I only work half days at school. The other half I'd like to come to the company with you." "No, Roby, I don't want you in the company." "Why? What's wrong with me? Why shouldn't I work in your company? I just want to work. I won't bother you. You won't even notice I exist. Work in a transport company is a man's business. You have to be rational, whereas women fall in love. They're instinctive. They get too enthusiastic too quickly, and, just as quickly, they get discouraged." But Fausto knew well that Roberta had a head as hard as granite, and, deep down, he was incapable of saying the no to such a strong-willed daughter. He therefore agreed to bring Roberta to work in the company, contradicting that part of himself deeply convinced that nature had created women for the family and men for business and its worries. Simultaneously, he took the risk that family members would invade what he had always considered his exclusive territory, and that this would end up forcing him to perhaps limit the freedoms he had always taken. "Roberta, I'm not interested in children and I don't like them. I don't want to work among whiny brats and spend my days chasing after youngsters and playing silly games. I studied to be a nursery school teacher, but I only did it because I didn't know what else to do." Roberta bursts out like this, having just returned home after resigning from the nursery school where she'd worked for only a few months. Her mother looks at her, knowing full well she'll never understand this daughter so different from herself, but she hadn't expected this decision. Not so soon, at least. Roberta's words are harsh, bordering on cruel for a mother. But there's no understanding between the two women, no possibility of connecting. Wally feels it's her duty to guide this rebellious girl, while Roberta can't stand her mother's presumption to dictate her life. The girl knows very well what she doesn't want. She doesn't want to be a nursery school teacher and, above all, she doesn't want to let others, least of all her mother, choose for her. The time for carefree living is over, and she needs to find her place in the world. "Now what do you intend to do, you madcap? You're not a little girl anymore. there's no more time to be rebellious and do the exact opposite of what a girl your age and social standing should do. Leave me alone, Roberta replies. I'll do something, certainly something more interesting than looking after boring little children. And Roberta had indeed found something. Dad, I want to work full-time at the company, with you. You've seen that in these trial months I haven't messed anything up or taken advantage of being your daughter. From the moment she set foot in the company, even though she had no administrative training, Roberta had seen a new world open up before her, a world of which she understood almost nothing but to which she was immediately drawn. Soon feeling unprepared for that world, she decided she would have to study and enrolled in evening classes. For a year, she alternated working at school in the mornings with working at Cippà in the afternoons, then ending her day at school. The rebellious girl had changed her skin. Her ideas about her future were gradually becoming clearer, and her life seemed to be taking on a less undefined shape. And all this had led her to utter that sentence to her father with her characteristic determination. After much remonstrance and attempts to dissuade her, Fausto finally consented. Roby, but let's be clear, no privileges again. There's a place in administration, and there, whether you like it or not, you'll continue to work as a simple clerk. But first, you must also learn German well. And you must also understand what kind of world ours is, that it's not made for women. Fausto had been clear, no favoritism. Fausto did have a soft spot for Roby. She was his first daughter, and then, although perhaps none of the three were aware of it or would ever admit it, she combined many traits reminiscent of young Wally, the woman who had made him fall in love, with certain aspects of her father's character. So Roberta managed to get her father's consent and, diligently, left for Germany to do an apprenticeship with a German freight forwarder, to practice the language and the techniques of a world so far removed from what she had studied. Upon her return, she resumed her place in administration, bills, primary ledger, invoices, registrations, making the accounts balance that never quite did. Was that Roberta's dream? To spend her days at a desk recording invoices and straining her eyes over numbers, sums, subtractions, and percentages? Not a chance. Not that her future was clear to her, but it was certainly clear that she wouldn't go back and that she would never complain to her father about that boring job. Too proud, too determined, decidedly stubborn. Her bosses didn't spare her the hard work or the scolding. She had everything to learn. As tough as her mind and will were, like granite, it hadn't been easy to resist and not admit defeat. Until she began to understand that the life of the company, Cippà Trasporti, the company that, incidentally, bears her name, passes through those numbers, those sheets, those sums, subtractions, and percentages. Of course, it's primarily her father's name, but, as it happens, it's also hers. And so those numbers begin to come alive. Behind them are the people who work at Cippà Trasporti, their efforts, their strengths and weaknesses, even their families. There are the relationships with clients, companies that rely on Cippà Trasporti's seriousness and professionalism to ensure their goods arrive at the right destination, on time, at the right cost. There are dozens of lorry drivers who travel for days across Europe with their lorries loaded with everything needed to fuel the world's industry. The numbers that pass before Roberta's eyes and through her hands translate, interpret, and measure what's happening around her. Cippà Trasporti isn't one of the giants of global transport, but even in its dimensions, it reflects the crises and expansions of the European economy. One can understand which country is acting as a locomotive and which is suffering or slowing down, which industrial sector is growing and has a greater future, and which is languishing. But it's not just about money, there's more to a business. There are people and their talents that deserve to be valued, guided, and experimented with. Roberta, who has a special passion for people, begins to like all of this. Fear and the Horse. Dear Mr. Cippà, I need to speak to you rather urgently. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 3 p.m? The tone of one of the partners at a well-established law firm in Lugano, though courteous, left little room for discussion, so Fausto, who had no particular out-of-office commitments for the following day, accepted. He tried to ask for clarification on the reason for the urgent summons, but again, the lawyer was not forthcoming with details and offered little satisfaction. We'll discuss it tomorrow, these are rather delicate matters. The next day, a few minutes before the appointed time, Fausto entered the antechamber of the firm, accompanied by Roberta. The decor was austere, as befitted a serious law firm. After some waiting, the efficient receptionist showed the two into the lawyer's office. After the customary pleasantries, the lawyer got straight to the point, delivering a long and detailed analysis of the international economic situation, which, he said, was experiencing complicated turbulence. He sounded like a university economics professor addressing his students. Fausto and Roberta, however, knew better than the presumptuous lawyer that the economic situation was difficult and unstable, dealing daily with currency fluctuations, cancellations, slowing orders, and so on. At the end of his lecture, and not before describing the even more dramatic market contingency of the helmet manufacturing company, a client of his, but also, as it happened, of Cippà Trasporti, he delivered the following terse statement: "In light of these circumstances, I regret to inform you that your client company is about to declare bankruptcy. I know that Cippà has a certain credit, but I must tell you in advance that this credit will never be repaid. Even if Cippà Trasporti were to pursue legal action, I can guarantee that it would have no chance of success, because at the end of the liquidation process, there won't even be enough francs left to pay all the employees. Good day." Roberta, who had the company accounts firmly in mind, felt fear for the first time. A fear very well seasoned with the anger that the lawyer's manner had provoked in her. She and Fausto stood up and left the office without a word. Once in the open air, Roberta, as if speaking to herself, muttered, "What a mess, what a disaster. Now what?" Fausto remained imperturbable, as always, even in the face of the worst news. "No, Roberta, calm down, don't worry. But Dad, do you know how much the bankruptcy of these unfortunate people is costing us? Roughly 90,000 francs. Which, in these times, with the shaky situation that lawyer so clearly explained to us, is a lot, and we certainly won't recover it elsewhere. How can you tell me to calm down?" Roberta had always struggled with her father's serenity, despite sharing many character traits. And on that occasion, the difference in their approaches became glaringly obvious. "Roby, I don't like it when you talk like that. Anyway, I know very well how many francs that company owes us, and I know the general situation equally well, which isn't the best. But banging our heads against a wall, complaining, feeling sorry for ourselves won't help us in the slightest, quite the opposite. There's no point even venting our resentment against the creditor company and its lawyer, who, poor things, have far bigger problems to worry about. Well, what's left for us to do then? Nothing?" Roberta exploded. "Wait to meet the same fate as the client who goes bankrupt without paying us. No, I won't stand for it. This time your wisdom seems like resignation to me. I want to file a lawsuit to try and get our money back, at least a part of it." "Roby," Fausto sighed and said patiently, "Roby, have you ever read Orwell's Animal Farm? Well, there's the only solution we can and must adopt. Boxer, the horse who served the revolution loyally, sacrificing himself in every way, at one point, faced with the enormous difficulties the farm was experiencing due to a terrible crisis and the discouragement of the other animals, says, the solution, as I see it, lies in working harder. From now on, I will get up an hour earlier in the morning. I see it like that good old horse too, perhaps because I'm starting to get old myself, we can do nothing but work harder." The quote took Roberta by surprise, and she acquiesced. Cippà did not go bankrupt, even though the accountant at one point during the year had been clear, if the accounts remain like this, in the end, there will be nothing left but to close. More a threat than a prediction. And the threat had an effect. The two operating partners, Cippà and Caro, did two things: they dug into their pockets and tried to understand where their company had weaknesses. Digging into their pockets served to inject fresh money into the company, to reconstitute the share capital by covering losses and thus ensure the company's continuity. But if this act was decisive in stemming the emergency, the other was crucial in putting the company back on the right track, that is, on the path to profitability. The decision was not obvious and, in fact, did not immediately gain everyone's consent. Roberta was initially taken aback, but said nothing. Perhaps she had realized that her father could be wrong, but even in the most complicated moments, his calm character, often mistaken for coldness and cynicism, and sometimes it truly was, helped him untangle the most convoluted situations. From tomorrow, in the company, Fausto said during a specially convened meeting with the heads of the various departments, you will see a couple of people you have never seen before, but who, for a while, will become a constant presence in our offices. They are not our colleagues, they will not work with us, but they will work for us, and here he emphasized his voice. They are two business consultants whose task is to tell us what to change that isn't working in our company and how to improve what is working. They know nothing about shipping, customs procedures, or goods traveling across Europe and the world. But they have seen and studied hundreds of companies. They have seen those that do well and those that do badly. For us, it will be a vital comparison. Cippà Trasporti will be observed, sifted, analyzed, every one of our activities, and here again he emphasized his voice, will be examined to understand how to do it better, faster, with greater efficiency and lower cost. At the end of their work, they will give us their advice, and we, with common sense, will adopt it. How long will it take? I don't know, I think a couple of months, perhaps a little more. Will it help? I am sure it will. For this, I ask you to give these gentlemen all your support and cooperation. Leaving the meeting, no one uttered a word, but spirits were not high. No one was excluded. 1,000 thoughts buzzed in everyone's head, and none were positive. Most saw their jobs at risk. It's well known that when business consultants arrive, the first thing they do is cut heads. Indeed, someone else thought, these fresh-faced chaps arrive knowing nothing about how to clear goods through customs, but they come here claiming to teach us our trade, which we've been doing for 20 years. I'm not telling those blokes a single thing, others thought. In short, when the two consultants crossed the threshold of Cippà Trasporti SA the following morning, they were not met with great warmth, nor did they expect it. Suits and ties, young and vaguely tanned, with that tan born of sunbeds, and the air that betrays time spent in the lecture halls of Bocconi, the most prestigious Italian university for those aspiring to a managerial career. The two first closeted themselves in Cippa's office and remained there almost the entire morning, whispering with Fausto about who knows what. Everyone's conjectures were even more ominous, if possible, than those of the previous day. But the devil, as they say, is not as ugly as he is painted. The two consultants, having overcome the initial negative impact, became a familiar presence in the company and soon became almost colleagues. Their analyses focused on Cippà Trasporti's administrative system and management model. And some inefficiencies came to light due to a system that had become obsolete and unsuitable for the times. The introduction of a new, more effective and rigorous management control method made it possible to identify the company's inefficiency points, to have greater awareness, supported by the incontestability of the numbers, of which activities were more profitable and which less so, and which were even loss-making. Of course, it also became clear in which sectors more work was needed. But no one was harmed. Mr. Cippa's talent. Sheets, cards, the first entry, writing and rewriting, copying, making mistakes, correcting. Making mistakes again and recorrecting. Carrying forward to the bottom of the page, calculating. And the accounts never balance. Roberta absolutely detested administration, but that didn't stop her from applying herself. Quite the opposite. Besides, her father Fausto had been clear, no one here will cut you any slack, no one will do what you dislike for you, no one here treats anyone badly, but no one will use kid gloves with you just because you're my daughter. As usual, he hadn't wasted words, a few firm sentences, spoken in his usual calm tone, had clarified beyond any reasonable doubt what awaited Roberta. Nor did she expect anything different. She knew she was entering the company through a narrow door, that she would enjoy no privileges, nor would she want any, nor any encouragement. It was clear to her that her father, Fausto, absolutely did not see her as a future company head, convinced as he was that the world of shipping was a purely masculine domain. Besides, one only had to look out the window to realize that her father wasn't entirely wrong. Around her were the offices and headquarters of many competitors. Roberta went through them one by one, and she couldn't recall a single woman or girl like herself in a managerial role. Of course, there were women, some secretaries, some working in accounting, but none held a top-level position of responsibility. Neither in almost family-run businesses like Cippà Trasporti, nor in big-name multinationals like Danza's. But she was not one to settle and conform to unwritten rules of custom and conformity, much less to accept staying in the background her whole life. To understand and to learn. To learn and to understand. This was what she had imposed on herself, and this was what she had done. Her first manager, Mrs. Louisa Maroney, had explained every aspect of administration step by step, from recording incoming invoices to debits and credits, all the way to reading a balance sheet and intuiting what lay behind every single figure. She had learned a great deal, but not just about administration. From that position, Roberta had been able to observe the entire company, how the various departments functioned, how the two most experienced figures, Fausto and Aldo, operated. She had begun to imagine some organizational changes in her head that, in her opinion, would simplify and speed up the work. She felt that Cippà needed a bit of modernization. For a long time, she had kept those ideas to herself, not entirely convinced they were good ideas. And even more, she doubted they would be well received. She let time pass. Above all, she allowed her presence in the company to become habitual for everyone and for everyone to be convinced, her father first and foremost, that she would not abandon that place, that her decision to join Cippà was not a momentary whim nor a fickle infatuation of a girl seeking novelty. Novelty, however, was what she wanted for her company. A few years earlier, a prestigious magazine like Time had chosen the personal computer as the subject of its year-end cover, traditionally dedicated to the personality who had most characterized the preceding 365 days. Roberta, always curious and fascinated by the new, had tried to understand if that still somewhat mysterious, if not magical, object could be useful to Cippà. She had read, informed herself, and discussed it with those who had already adopted that new tool. Finally, she was convinced it was a step that had to be taken, otherwise Cippà would fall behind competitors who, some, and not just the largest, had already equipped themselves with that technology. "Dad, we need to equip Cippà with a computer." True to her style, Roberta hadn't minced words, she had gone straight to the point. That statement was followed by a rather long discussion because Fausto had put up fierce resistance. The objections had been the classic ones. What do we need it for? We've always done it this way, so why change? Our people aren't trained, it costs too much, then no one will use it. The objections had become progressively weaker, and Roberta had energetically parried them all, demonstrating that she had thoroughly researched the matter. Fausto's talent finally emerged clearly on that occasion. For his entire life, he had managed the company relying on his memory, on the notes he wrote in a diary, on his people's ability to precisely manage administrative processes and client affairs. That had been his skill for a lifetime, a life that had taken him around the world and led him to found a successful business. Strong in his experience and undisputed authority, he could have ended the discussion with a blunter "absolutely not, we'll carry on as always, I'm not interested in chasing fads." To be honest, he had to swallow that phrase with some difficulty, but in the end, he hadn't uttered it. And instead of that, almost incredulous, his ears had heard his voice say, "Roby, I'm not convinced it will be useful to us, but if you think it might be, do as you see fit. But you must take care of everything, choose the supplier, choose the right model, oversee the installation, learn how to use it, and ensure our people learn how to use it in turn." And Roberta had left Fausto's office triumphant. It was perhaps the first time Roberta had been entrusted with such an important task and responsibility. All hers. She was satisfied and far from frightened. She immediately set to work, summoned several suppliers, requested proposals and offers, and then made her choice. It was entirely her decision because no one in the company had the expertise or experience to advise her. And so, Cippà Trasporti, with eyes closed, entered modernity. The loneliness of the entrepreneur. The company's life continued. Well, reasonably well, although, naturally, there were the usual workplace hiccups, a deal gone sour, some payment delays, a delivery not made perfectly on time. All things that shouldn't happen but do. Cippà Trasporti had made strides. Many of them. It had even brilliantly overcome some difficult moments. But none of the previous ones had the magnitude and gravity of what was about to arrive. Or it would be more appropriate to say what was about to descend upon the company, because the negative force of the event was every bit as destructive as a cyclone that, indeed, crashes down on a house and a forest. that the 16th of September, 1992 in Chiasso, the day, with its 18 degrees Celsius, promised to be cooler than the September average. The sky was grey, and a few drops of rain were expected for the day. In the morning, when he left the house early, a light mist hinted at autumnal moods. Fausto, from his office on the first floor of Via Volta, if he looked out of the large window behind his desk, could only partially see the mountains, which were losing their vibrant summer green and darkening as the clouds advanced. Just then, the door opened, and still on the threshold, Carlo Luppi, a trusted and long-standing colleague, said, "Mr. Fausto, have you heard? Turn on the TV." Fausto switched on the television. He understood from his colleague's expression that there must be a serious reason for him to do so. Many kilometers away, in Rome, the day was hot, soon to reach 30 degrees, and the sky was clear. Not unusual conditions for the Roman late summer, which often offers unforgettable days. And that day, too, would remain unforgettable, though not because of the weather. Giuliano Amato, the Italian Prime Minister, was on air, speaking to his fellow citizens. In a 20-minute speech, the fateful word devaluation would never be uttered, but behind the Byzantine complexities of which Dr. Subtle, as Amato was nicknamed by commentators for his analytical acumen and his ability to construct verbal arabesques around even the simplest concepts, the meaning was clear. He was announcing that the lira would undergo a 7.3% devaluation. Fausto and Carlo looked into each other's eyes for a moment. Carlo was clearly more than just worried, he was scared. He knew that for a company that earned in lire and bought in francs, a 7% negative differential was a terrible blow, truly terrible. Capable of eroding profit margins, but above all, of making the company more vulnerable to competitors whose business was in strong markets and not in Italy, like Cippà Trasporti. Fausto understood that look well, and he understood that much of the company's future and the people who worked there depended on how he responded to it. He knew very well that the situation was extremely serious, not least because, without being a high-finance guru, he had a well-founded suspicion that the monetary storm would not subside in a few days, nor would that -7.5% be the lowest point for the very weak Italian lira. And he knew very well that for a company like his, which worked mainly for Italian businesses, that was just the first of a series of days, each darker than the last. And he also knew that stronger competitors, those who could enjoy the solidity provided by international capital, or those whose majority business was with Germany and other economically and financially robust countries, would find it child's play to spread the rumor that Cippà Trasporti was in crisis and therefore at risk of unreliability. All this flashed through Fausto's mind in the blink of an eye. Luppi, and now what will we do? But his voice and eyes seemed to hint more at a verdict of helplessness than a real question. Fausto, we will do everything that needs to be done. We will work harder than before, better than before. We will get through this. Fausto hadn't said anything about how or what, not least because at that moment he didn't have the faintest idea. However, the calm and confidence with which he had spoken, the absence of agitation in his voice, had produced the desired effect. Many years later, Luppi would recall, "I never heard Mr. Fausto raise his voice, complain, or blame anyone or the situation. For him, there was always a solution. And even in that situation, which was decidedly dramatic and fraught with negative consequences for our company, he didn't lose his calm. And that reassured all of us. Then, he was right, the only solution was to work harder than before, and no one held back. His composure, whether real or merely apparent, was decisive. The situation was truly dramatic, not least because the -7.5% was just the beginning. The real devaluation against stronger currencies like the dollar and the German franc reached as much as -30%. Maintaining composure at certain times is not easy, but Fausto succeeded. That, after all, was his character, and it cost him no particular effort. But it's one thing to maintain outward calm, and another to quell the ghosts and silence the furies stirring in one's head. In Fausto's mind, the ghosts and furies were there, indeed, but he never allowed them to manifest externally, convinced that a company head, like a family head, must know how to take on all responsibilities and bear their weight, sparing others, including worries, tensions, and difficult choices. On that occasion, it was the same. That very afternoon, a meeting was called, attended by all department heads. Fausto was clear. He explained what had happened, said that the event required rapid measures to be taken. First of all, let's raise our antennae, he said, and keep all our Italian clients under control. Some of them could find themselves in great difficulty and go under. And Cippà must avoid getting entangled with too many credits towards those at risk of failure. We are already losing money on the exchange rate, but at least let's try to collect everything that is due to us. Secondly, let's open up to the internal Swiss and German markets. Today we are too unbalanced towards Italy. We will also have to keep our costs under control, so, for a while, there's no point in coming to ask for salary adjustments for yourselves or your people. I won't be able to accommodate you. We will go through a difficult period. We will have to work hard, as we always have, but even more so. And we will make it. We must hold on for a while, for a few months, perhaps a year. Then, you'll see, after the initial shocks, Italian companies will benefit from the devaluation, and their goods will start traveling across Europe again thanks to lower prices, and they will need us more than before. He had spoken in his usual calm, straightforward, clear tone. He hadn't lied, but at the same time, he had given the impression of knowing what needed to be done, even if, deep down, he wasn't so calm. He felt, strongly, the responsibility for the 40 people who worked for him, and their families. He never told anyone, not even his family, about the worry that, every now and then, gripped his stomach. Many predictions came true in that complicated 1992 for all of Europe, disastrous for Italy, when many companies did not withstand the economic turbulence, and others saw their leaders caught up in investigations into economic and political corruption. For a few months, exports from Italy collapsed, and not all debts were honored, including those owed to Cippà. It was a horrible year of sacrifices, hard work, great tensions, and much money lost. In the end, Cippà Trasporti really did make it through. A turning point. It was a sweltering day in the Chiasso office and the phones were ringing lazily as July reached its peak. Italian companies were preparing for their traditional August closure, and requests for Cippà's services were dwindling in number and value. So, that unexpected call arrived. "Roberta, there's a Mr. Hermes on the phone who wants to speak to your father. What do I do? Shall I pass him on to you?" Fausto was on holiday, on the other side of the world. "My father is away, can I be of assistance?" The response from the caller was peremptory. It wasn't a question of power, but of duty. It was a matter of utmost urgency, take or leave it. They were dealing with organizing permits and escorts for an exceptional transport, namely taking a vital piece of machinery from a route to France. Roberta knew that exceptional transports were a thorny issue that Cippà tackled reluctantly, and what's more, Fausto usually handled them. In the split seconds between the client's request and Roberta's response, her mind was racing with 1,000 turbulent thoughts. What do I do? What shall I say? Who could possibly take care of it? What would my father say if we said no? And so on, until the phone line finally connected the client to the following phrase: "Fine, Mr. Hermes, no problem. As I told you, Fausto isn't available, but I'll take care of your transport." Roberta hung up the phone just in time to collect her thoughts, burn off some adrenaline that the call had put into circulation, and she was ready to take charge of the situation. She'd never dealt with exceptional transports before, but deep down she thought, now or never, and then, what's so difficult about it that I couldn't do it with attention and scrupulousness? The fact that Cippà had handled exceptional transports moderately was an added stimulus for Roberta, not a brake. And then there was the word exceptional, which ignited Roberta's interest and made the task fascinating. Nothing like routine and normality embodied the arch-nemesis of Roberta. For those unfamiliar with the specific terminology, by exceptional transport we mean the transfer of objects, mostly machinery, tubes, or large-scale manufactured items that require particularly large vehicles to follow specially studied routes and obtain specific permits from the relevant authorities in each country they pass through. So, Roberta first studied the characteristics of the cargo being transported, then checked which of Cippà's usual transporters had a suitable vehicle available, and began to get an idea of the best possible route. By late afternoon, after calculating the time difference, she picked up the phone and dialed an international number. "Hi Dad, how are you enjoying your holiday?" "Everything all right. Fausto was waiting for that daily call, just like everyone else in the office. Even if he was on holiday, he liked to stay informed about any developments at work. But this time, he was taken aback. "Listen, Dad, I wanted to tell you that Mr. Hermes asked us to handle an exceptional transport rather urgently and—" "Sorry, we'll have to say no," Fausto replied. "Actually, I've already said yes." Fausto, never one to lose his cool, lost it this time. "You're crazy. I'm not here to deal with it, and there's no one in the office who even knows where to start." Despite being thousands of miles away, Fausto's voice came through loud and clear, carrying all the irritation that the phone line didn't attenuate. But Roberta remained calm and said, "I've already thought this through. I'll take care of it," and, she added, "you can help me. Every day at this same time, I'll call you to tell you what I've done, and you can tell me if it's going well, and together we'll decide the next steps." Fausto put his anger away and agreed that, given the commitment already made to the client, this could be a viable solution, albeit one with risks. In his heart of hearts, he thought, but didn't say, that his daughter was crazy, but also brave and determined. Now she'd have the chance to prove whether she was capable too. Roberta did an excellent job. Not only did that transport go smoothly, but Roberta fell in love with this type of work, which from then on became one of Cippà Trasporti's specialties. That job, Roberta told her father once they'd successfully completed the first project, I like. Fausto teased her, "You've had a lucky break, it's not always as easy as that." As expected, Roberta didn't take kindly to this and didn't hesitate to remind her father of all the problems she'd faced and solved on her own while managing that transport, because their evening calls often came too late for taking decisions. Decisions she'd made with only her father's hindsight to guide her. Fausto was well aware of this, but if on one hand he wasn't in the habit of praising those who worked alongside him, on the other he wanted his daughter not to get carried away. That job wasn't easy and the difficulties she faced during that occasion couldn't be considered standard. The discussion ended there for the day, but both knew it would resurface soon enough. And so it did. Under Roberta's determined push, Cippà made exceptional transports a speciality of the company and an important growth driver. Steel. Their imposing silhouettes traverse the night and, if it weren't for the headlights that cast menacing glances at those who cross their lights and for the dull rumble of the engines, their presence along the road that descends from Bodio towards Chiasso could pass unnoticed on this dark and rainy May night. The 10 Bisonti della Strada, one behind the other in a tightly closed chain with only a couple of meters distance between them, proceed cautiously along a sinuous and slippery track made so by the heavy rain. They transport extremely heavy machinery, transformers, and high furnace parts, a 50-meter-long articulated lorry, 4 meters wide and with 2 engines, one to pull and the other to push, carries the largest machine, over 200 tons in weight. "Sir, this is an encumbering and very heavy convoy. To avoid any inconvenience and not hinder traffic, we must proceed at night. Please note that the heaviest lorries will travel at a maximum speed of 8 kilometers per hour. There must be no slightest inconvenience, or else by the time we arrive in Genoa the ship will have already set sail. Don't worry, Mrs. Roberta, if you organize everything properly, give us all the right information, signal the route that needs to be taken, we'll make sure the road is clear and there's no delay." The conversation between Roberta and the head of the cantonal police had taken place in a good spirit of collaboration. Anyway, both were used to consulting each other and finding the best solutions together in different circumstances. Exceptional transports were Roberta's passion, and this was no more complicated than others. To get all that stuff down we need to take vehicles that are at least 7 meters wide, which means occupying the entire carriageway of the motorway. Unfortunately the route is entirely on the motorway, otherwise it would be a bit of a problem. The cantonal official, after a brief reflection, said, "It will be better to close the motorway to normal traffic, and this means you'll have to make the vehicles travel at night. Do you think you can manage it? Can you set off after 22.30 to do the entire journey? At the latest by the 5th of May, 30 in the morning we must reopen because that's a stretch of road too important to be kept blocked for any longer." The dialogue, besides defining a modality and route, also defined above all the end of a 40-year and more story, the story of Ticinese steel production. Steel, as the war had shown without a shadow of doubt, is a strategic material for whoever possesses it and for the country that produces it. And Ticino was fortunate in this because in 46 a strange game of coincidences and foresight led to the construction of an ironworks right in the heart of the canton. At the root of everything, a football pitch. It had happened that two Italian entrepreneurs already active in steel production in their own country thought it could be convenient to start an activity in Ticino where the economic conditions could be more advantageous. On a Sunday, the two began to explore the canton from Chiasso upwards in search of a suitable location for the productive plant. Having reached Bodio without finding a suitable area, they go to the sports field where the local team is playing, whose president is an engineer and entrepreneur. The two Italians needed only 15 minutes break between one half and the other to explain their project to the Ticinese and gain his immediate agreement. You provide the capital and technology, I'll give you the land and electricity. We don't even need to vent our frustration towards the creditor company and its lawyer, who have far bigger problems on their hands. Well, then what are we supposed to do? Just wait around until we go bankrupt too. Roberta exploded. No, I refuse to accept that. I want to take action and try to get some of our money back, at least a part of it. Roby, Fausto sighed patiently, have you ever read Animal Farm by Orwell? That's the only solution we can and must adopt. Gondrano, the horse who served the revolution with loyalty and sacrifice, said, the solution is to work harder. From now on, I'll get up an hour earlier. I see it just like that old horse, perhaps because I'm getting older too, we can't do anything else but work harder. Roberta was taken aback by the reference, but she adapted. At the beginning of the 90s, after a change in ownership and some unsuccessful attempts to revive it, the Ticinese company ceased production. And it was Cippà Trasporti that would put the final word. The area occupied by the ironworks would be transformed, in the early 2000s, into an important intermodal center and incubator for new entrepreneurial realities. The final act takes place all on one night when a convoy of 10 Bisonti della Strada, lined up behind each other and occupying almost an entire kilometer, escorted by cantonal police cars, travels along wide stretches of the Gottardo motorway, partly in the opposite carriageway, partly in the correct direction. And thus they cross the entire canton, from Bodio to Chiasso with destination Genoa port. Everything will work perfectly, no inconvenience will slow down the convoy's march. Demolishing an ironworks is no trivial matter. The glorious years of Ticino. From 1990 to 2000. With the turn of the 1990s, the canton of Ticino experienced its glorious years. The transformation that occurred in the canton was perhaps more rapid and profound than elsewhere. With a historically agricultural economy, which then became deeply linked to border dynamics, and eventually a financial one, the Confederation, and the canton with it, lost to euros as a result of federal and international decisions to euro, that sort of privileged status that had characterized it until then, a change not appreciated by everyone. In the first half of the 90s, the heart of the cantonal economy was still strongly rooted in industrial models with a high labor component. But starting from the second half of the decade, this gave way more decisively to entrepreneurial initiatives focused on the introduction of new technologies. While Swiss companies with their own precise characterization, typical of the country a euro from the great watchmaking names to chemicals and textiles a euro, continued their journey, the greatest growth came precisely from other sectors where research and innovation constituted the decisive push. The knowledge economy, as economists prefer to call it, found ever greater space, becoming the driving force of a particularly lively era. The rates of employment growth were extraordinary and would become even more significant in the fullness of the 2000s. To use a somewhat hyperbolic but not inaccurate expression, one could say that the canton experienced a true renaissance. The processes were no longer limited to purely local environments, rather, the winning companies were those that managed to integrate into an international network of relationships. In this process, transport, communications, and logistics naturally played an ever more decisive role. Growth meant identifying new trends and transforming one's own business, and there was one word that in those years became increasingly decisive: digitalization. Let the driver be a faithful. The list is long, detailed, and precise. It must be read carefully to ensure it is adhered to with the utmost rigor, without errors or omissions. After all, with this client euro, one certainly cannot be superficial. And the list in the office passes from hand to hand. Whoever reads it first remains incredulous, then thinks it's a joke by their colleagues, and finally, upon realizing that it's all true, passes it to someone else. The initial requirements concern the vehicle, perfectly washed and polished, without dents, checked in all its mechanical components, new tires with clearly legible treads, the exterior cabin of the tractor unit must be red, the interior in fine leather and well kept, with no more than 10,000 kilometers on the clock. Then they move on to the man: short hair, clean shaven, tidy, suitable clothing, polished and cared for shoes, teetotal, non-smoker, good-spoken Italian, and so on, with one prescription following the next. It's already hard enough to find a lorry driver who meets these conditions, but the last one is the most surprising of all, even if, on closer inspection, it is also the most logical: Catholic. Yes, the driver must be Catholic. The protocol that the Vatican authorities had given to Cippà Trasporti had to be respected to the letter. The young priest who acted as the liaison had been very clear on this aspect: respect all the points you find in this document if you wish to have the privilege of bringing the tree, appropriately decorated, to St. Peter's Square to remind all pilgrims that it is Christmas. It was an initiative explicitly desired by Pope John Paul II, and since 1982, it would be the 17th tree to adorn Bernini's colonnade. The Polish Pope had wanted a decorated tree to accompany the traditional nativity scene, as a sign of consideration for believers from Northern Europe, where the custom of having an evergreen tree originates. And so, a noble competition was sparked among the mountain towns of Central Europe to secure that ephemeral privilege. The first was actually a Roman tree, supplied by a nursery in Rome, but in 1983 it was Innsbruck's turn, then Serra San Bruno, followed by Dobbiaco, Carinthia, and so on until 1998, when the choice fell upon a magnificent tree from the Black Forest Euro, specifically from Bad Säckingen in Baden wa 1/4 Artemberg, Germany, but right next to Switzerland, just 35 kilometers from Basel. It was therefore thought easier to entrust the task to a Swiss haulier, and the lucky assignment fell to the people at Cippà. Upon closer inspection, the condition that the driver had to be Catholic, although somewhat anachronistic, shouldn't have been too surprising. However, it did pose a bit of a difficulty due to the fact that lorry drivers from Eastern Europe, who now form the majority, are often of the Islamic faith. While one might wonder who would check the driver's documents once they arrived at the Vatican, for a serious transport company, the conditions laid down by the client are unquestionable. Therefore, Cippà set about finding the lorry and the drivers that met the requirements. A few days later, a package of documents, including the baptism certificate of the chosen driver, set off for the offices of the Governorate of Vatican City, which was responsible for giving its approval for the entire transport operation. Once the trust of the Holy Father's delegates had been won, the hardest part was over, because transporting a 25-meter-tall tree was not an operation that could cause any particular problems for those accustomed to carrying far more complicated loads across half of Europe. The lorry arrived punctually at the agreed meeting point with the inhabitants of the German spa town, chosen from among all to have the honor of gifting its most beautiful tree to the pontiff. There was a great celebration for the departure, and the memory of that warm farewell accompanied the drivers throughout their journey, across the Alps, the Po Valley, the Apennines, and right up to the entrance of Via della Conciliation, the wide avenue that leads from the heart of secular Rome to the center of Christianity. But there are several dissonant coincidences in this story. The driver had to be Catholic, yet no one, not even in the austere Vatican halls, asked about the denomination of the company's owners, who are, precisely, Protestants. But the dissonance is perhaps even deeper. The tradition of the Christmas tree is typically Nordic and, while Christian, is hardly Catholic at all. The tree originates from the Feast of Adam and Eve that was celebrated on the 24th of December in ancient Germany, and the baubles with which it is decorated symbolize, in fact, the apples of sin. What is so Catholic about all this? The Dutch arrive. They had acted in advance, thanks to an intermediary. There are two managers who currently work for a large logistics company, but they want to leave because they don't earn enough there. They have a respectable portfolio of clients and are willing to put it at the disposal of whoever is prepared to pay them well. The conversation was clear: take it or leave it. A difficult decision that Cippà Trasporti had to make quickly. "All right," said Fausto, "let's meet them." I want to get to know them, I don't buy blindly. They were two young men, confident, decisive, perhaps not very talkative but very sure of themselves, as the Dutch often are. They repeated to Fausto what their intermediary had already said, that they would bring with them a fair number of new clients they had acquired during their previous work experiences. Thanks to us, said the more decisive of the two, you will be able to open new routes, and we will bring you the clients with whom we have built solid relationships over the years. The deal was struck, and the two Dutchmen joined Cippà Trasporti's payroll. Their cost was substantial, but the promises, if kept, were alluring. The company was going through one of its periods of stagnation. Things weren't going badly, but they weren't growing either. The market was changing, while Cippà had remained somewhat stationary. Fausto was beginning to have less desire to adapt to external changes, and Roberta hadn't yet fully taken over the management of the whole company. Today our business is entirely concentrated between Italy and Switzerland and Italy. We are too dependent on the fluctuations of trade relations between these two countries. We need to find other markets and other routes if we don't want to remain confined to a niche that is too narrow. These were the concerns and thoughts running through the minds of Roberta and Fausto. Let's hope these two young men really know their stuff, as the person who introduced them claims, they thought. The Dutchman set to work. The first step was to broaden Cippà's horizons. The European Union had become a reality, no longer just an idea. More and more countries were joining, and the march towards a single currency seemed unstoppable. Switzerland was not among the members, but this could not be an insurmountable obstacle. And indeed, it wasn't. Let's open a VAT number in one of the community countries, and we'll be able to operate with all the other countries without problems, advised the Dutchmen, who have made their trading ability and ingenuity in overcoming difficulties their national hallmark. The proposal was accepted by Roberta and Fausto with interest, mixed with a small dose of skepticism. But they had decided to trust those two, and so they did. When it came to choosing which country to open the new VAT number in, there wasn't much debate. Italy, whose bureaucratic entanglements Fausto and Roberta knew well, was immediately discarded. Germany, which could have been a good choice from both a commercial and linguistic perspective, was ruled out due to the rather cool regard Germans have for the Swiss, particularly Italian-speaking ones. The choice ultimately fell on the United Kingdom, a decision in which several factors played a decisive role. Fausto and Roberta knew it well, having lived and worked there. Personally, they were familiar with its language, customs, administrative systems, and bureaucracy. They also knew many people there, some of whom they considered friends. In no time, the VAT number was opened, allowing Cippà to become a company capable of operating across all countries within the European community. Cippà, which at that moment was suffering from a phase of stagnation, found in this new venture a vital surge of energy to break out of its rut and start growing again, preparing itself for the new market reality of the 2000s. On this front, the Dutchmen proved reliable. At least on this point. They had much less success with their commercial promises. Not one of the clients they boasted of having in their portfolio a euro big or smaller euro showed up at Cippà's door. These two are not covering their costs, was the bitter conclusion after a year of collaboration. However, from them we have learned something new and important for the future of Cippà, commented Roberta when the two left with their resignations, to everyone's relief. Cippà entered the 2000s with a new awareness, ready, at least culturally, to face the challenges of the third millennium. The broken flight. The hang glider rose gently into the August sky. The pilot, though not having many flying hours under his belt, handled the craft with calm confidence. The towing plane pulled the hang glider away from the ground, drawing it closer to the intense blue of the sky. Just a few more moments and the tow cable would detach. Enrico Eurov, known to everyone as Chico Euro, would begin his flight in the silence broken only by the sound of the wind. Life for Enrico had not been easy. He was still a child when his mother passed away, taken by what is politely called an incurable disease, almost as if the word cancer euro with its aggressive euro could cause even greater pain to those left behind. His mother had left 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, in their father's care. Aldo Carasquared found himself, while still young, with 3 needy children who required all the attention, affection, and protection that children need. he did not shy away from his duties as a father. He fulfilled them as best he could, with effort and dedication, trying to ensure those children lacked for nothing. He had not remarried. Although there was no shortage of women in his life, he had not wanted to replace his wife and the mother of his children with anyone. He was assisted by childminders and au pairs, but he did not want a surrogate mother. Only when they were much older, well past 20, did he decide to remarry. By then, the boys had chosen their own paths. The eldest had joined the cantonal police. Chico was studying business economics. Chico did well at school, he liked it and succeeded. He was a boy like many others, and like many others, he had numerous passions. Sports, chasing girls, but above all, one passion, making music. He played the saxophone, and did so rather well. This also contributed to his success with women who were fascinated by the young man who, blowing passionately into the instrument, could coax from it sounds that were both melodious and romantic, as well as aggressive and jagged. Then came the time for work, and Chico first went to gain experience in Great Britain, some internships to familiarize himself with the language and the job. Once ready, he took the leap. He arrived at Cippà Trasporti, the company founded by Fausto, in which Aldo had received a small share as a gift when it was established. By one of life's strange twists, he was assigned a role that corresponded little or not at all to his training. Roberta, who knew nothing of administration, but would learn, was put in charge of invoices and accounts. Chico, who had studied business economics and management, found himself responsible for the commercial side of Cippà Trasporti. Roberta and Chico are the future of Cippà Trasporti, and Fausto and Aldo likely saw them as the ones who would take their place at the helm of the company. The two young people were there to learn, training to assume the role expected of them. They share only their youth and the expectations placed upon them, nothing else. Otherwise, they are as different as can be imagined. Roberta is determined, Chico is reflective. Roberta has the fire of innovation within her, Chico feels safe walking the traditional path. Roberta tackles problems head-on, even the most unpleasant ones, and tries to solve them, perhaps with a shout or two. Chico is rigorous, affable outside work, inflexible within it. The saxophone is his best companion when things don't go as he wishes at work. He locks himself in the office and begins to play his favorite instrument until his anger subsides. They are different, but they have found their balance, not always perfect, but ultimately functional for the good management of the company. Cippà Trasporti is in a phase of growth and transformation. It needs energy, clarity, new ideas, stability. The older generations are stepping aside for the new ones. Roberta and Chico are increasingly taking responsibilities onto their shoulders. The year 2000, which opens the third millennium, is full of novelties and hopes for them, and for everyone. The aircraft climbs, soon in Rico, but for everyone Chico, will be free in the sky. But something goes wrong. The hang glider is not yet at cruising altitude when the tow cable snaps. Chico makes a desperate turn to head back towards the runway and attempt a landing. The aircraft stalls, tips, pitches up, dives erratically like a discarded paper plane. The right wing hits the ground, and the hang glider pirouettes on the runway before coming to a stop, crumpled upon itself. The rush to the hospital is futile. Life with Chico had not been easy. Why slow down and not accelerate? The passing of the baton from Fausto to Roberta was taking place, or rather, it had already occurred on a practical level, even if not yet formally. For some time, Fausto, despite turning up at the office every morning and occupying his assigned room, had delegated the burden of management and decision-making to Roberta. No one in the company could say exactly when the transition from one generation to the other happened, but it was clear to everyone that Roberta was steering Cippà, and that her drive, energy, and ambition were giving the company a pace it had somewhat lost in recent times. The market is highly effervescent, Roberta would often repeat. But Cippà has been benefiting from it to a much lesser extent than its potential. We must accelerate, we must grow. Indeed, the 1990s were proving to be very lively and full of opportunities. Technological innovation and the opening of markets were generating a positive wave in the business world, with sustained growth rates in most countries around the globe. For Cippà too, business was not going badly at all, but not as well as it could have. We are still too small to capture and intercept client demand. We must grow to be even more reliable in the eyes of our clients, but if we don't increase our turnover, taking on new staff can be a risk. But the annus horribilis of the global economy suddenly shattered that perfect world that seemed to be continually growing. The year 2008 announced with global clamor by the Lehman Brothers drama when all television channels showed images of employees from the fourth largest investment bank sadly leaving their offices with cardboard boxes in hand after being laid off. Inaugurated the most severe global economic crisis since the Second World War, comparable to the fateful 29. Not even Switzerland remained immune this time. In a flash, Cippà Trasporti saw its turnover plummet by 30%. A disaster. Not very different from what Cippà had gone through in 1992 when the devaluation of the lira threatened collapse. But at that time the company was still in Fausto's hands, who, in keeping with his style, had faced the difficult moment with calmness and psychological solidity, managing to instill just as much stability in all the employees. Now, however, Fausto was no longer the reference point for the company. He would certainly turn up at the office every morning and, if asked, continue to give his opinions and suggestions. But the helm was now in Roberta's hands, and everyone wondered whether and how she would manage to face that terrible crisis. The widespread fear was that the first measure as many were doing would be a drastic reduction in staff. But doing what everyone expects has never been Roberta's style. She had already proved it when everyone expected her to be a nursery school teacher, or when no only starting with Fausto wanted her to join the company. Even this time, she surprised everyone. "Let's invest," she said. "This is the time to invest to strengthen ourselves commercially." Her closest collaborators were left speechless when Roberta came out with this peremptory and contrarian statement. Almost all of them in their hearts thought it was a colossal piece of foolishness, and that Roberta would soon come to her senses, or that Fausto would make her see reason. But not everyone, among the younger staff, some appreciated that courageous decision. Prominent among these was Angelo Betto, the current CEO, a recent addition to Cippà who, although still very young, had significant experience behind him, and whom Roberta had noticed for his sharpness and enthusiasm. That first meeting, in which Robbie as everyone now called her had launched her program, was followed by several others. In these, with what was becoming her core group of collaborators, plans were drawn up, simulations and hypotheses were made, to finally arrive at the definitive decision to strengthen the commercial department. Until then, the task of hunting for clients had been undertaken by the owners and happened largely by word of mouth. From that moment on, Cippà would have a solid commercial structure, made up of professionals whose exclusive task was to find clients. For people were tested and hired precisely with this specific goal in mind. Time, and very little of it, took on the responsibility of proving how sound that decision had been. Cippà, despite the difficult times, started racing again, and Roberta began to consolidate her leadership over the company, proving herself to be a leader not by right of inheritance, but through visionary capacity and entrepreneurial spirit. But investing in human resources didn't stop at hiring a few people, it consisted mainly of investing in training, both technical and managerial. This too was the fruit of Roberta's management, who had first experienced on herself the importance of learning and expanding one's professional baggage, never considering that "we have always done it this way" represents a good philosophy, neither for the individual nor for the company. Everyone at Cippà Trasporti has had the opportunity to update themselves and put themselves to the test to improve their skills and personal aptitudes. Many have benefited from it. Betto, for his part, began his ascent within the company that would take him very high. The business goes digital. For Michael Soares, of a Portuguese father and Ticinese mother, a new phase in life was beginning. He had just left a brilliant military career and had given himself some time to think before deciding on his future. Returning to Chiasso, he wanted to pop in and say hello to his colleagues at Cippà, the company where he had taken his first steps into the working world, where he had learned a lot and where he still had many friends. He was now sitting in Roberta's office, and she, ever curious about everything, was peppering him with questions about his experience in the army. "What did you do? What did you learn? Why did you leave?" And Michael told her, explaining everything, focusing mainly on the final part of his military life, where the tasks assigned to him had led him to engage with new things that fascinated him. You see, Roberta, in the end I became the head of a group of people responsible for cybersecurity and marketing. Marketing? In the army, she exclaimed, surprised. Yes, indeed. For instance, in the run-up to the last referendum, where voters had to decide whether to fund the purchase of new military aircraft, my section was very busy trying to convince as many voters as possible to vote yes. And how did you do it? We used the internet and Facebook a lot. The world had suddenly changed. It's difficult to pinpoint the exact moment it happened, but it wasn't a particularly slow evolutionary process. One word defined this revolution: the internet, or the web. Roberta, 20 years prior, had fought with her father to introduce computers into the company. Now she found herself having to face another change driven by technology, even more radical than the first. I wanted the computer at all costs, she had repeatedly told herself, and, true to her habits, she began studying to try to understand, to explore, to see what others were doing. Not just competitors, who were often slower to adapt to changes than Cippà, but innovative companies from other sectors. Her innate curiosity and passion for the new fed on books, manuals, seminars, and training courses. Overwhelmed by this desire to learn, Roberta understood above all that she needed to surround herself with young people who, sharing her passion, would be able to translate her desire for innovation into concrete, useful actions. Now she had in front of her that young Maniero, a lieutenant in the Swiss army, but still a young Maniero who was telling her about an important experience he had gained in exactly those fields that fascinated her so much, but for which she had not yet found a satisfactory solution. The question escaped her lips, quite unexpectedly for her interlocutor. Listen, Michael, what would you think about coming back to work with us to deal with digital marketing? The idea appealed to Suarez immediately. He valued Roberta and Cippà. Marketing and the internet were his passion, and they were certainly the frontier where everyone would have to test themselves. He didn't have to think too much, he accepted instantly. Angelo, come into my office, I want you to meet someone. Angelo entered and, finding himself face to face with Michael, said, But Roberta, I know Michael very well. Don't you remember that he worked with me as an intern when he first started at the company? Angelo couldn't comprehend how Roberta had forgotten this. I know, and I remember Angelo. It's you who doesn't know that. From tomorrow, Michael will be our new marketing and digital manager. Thus began a new phase for Cippà. Digital marketing, well exploited by the commercial structure that had been reorganized over the years, became a truly powerful driver for business. Shipping is an art. One day, the director of an important bank in Chiasso called, Good morning, Roberta, I would like you to meet a gentleman, one of my clients, whom you could perhaps help. When thinking of freight forwarders, one immediately pictures Euro, perhaps influenced by films and Euro, large industrial warehouses on the outskirts of cities, enormous cranes maneuvering in poorly paved yards, lorries and trailers moving machinery and containers. It's all very industrial, goods, spare parts, crates. All of this is true, but not always. And this was precisely what happened one day in 2016 when Roberta answered her mobile phone and recognized the voice of the bank director, who said exactly that. He didn't specify anything else, he didn't explain how Roberta could help this gentleman, nor did he name the client. In short, it was a call seemingly designed to intrigue, and inevitably, it achieved its goal. When Roberta entered the director's office, she didn't know what to expect. Yes, certainly, if he had called her personally and arranged a meeting in his office, it must be about business, and probably not traditional shipping, because that wouldn't require such formality or the circumspection with which the director had spoken. Roberta entered, and the director politely rose from his armchair, stepped around his mahogany desk, and greeted her with a firm handshake. There was no one else in the office, but it only took a few moments for the secretary's voice to crackle over the intercom on the director's desk, announcing the guest's arrival. The name clearly indicated that he was not Swiss. Things were getting interesting. A man with a slightly dark complexion entered. His age was hard to pin down, and his face was marked by lines that gave him a certain charm, not born of old age, but of sun, wind, and ocean. Buenos dias, he said to Roberta with a barely perceptible bow. Then, turning to the director, Good morning, my friend. From the mutual introductions, Roberta learned that the newcomer had businesses all over the world and numerous interests in Switzerland too. "Well, sir, how can I be of assistance? What type of goods do you need to ship, and to where?" Roberta's tone, while polite, betrayed a hint of wariness. Amidst all the mystery and reticence surrounding that meeting, one thing was clear: Rodriguez was not an industrialist, and the nature of the product they were to discuss didn't entirely put Roberta at ease. "My dear Roberta, may I call you that, or am I taking too great a liberty?" said the man with considerable elegance. "As you wish," Roberta replied crisply. "My dear Roberta, do not be hasty. You will understand everything by the end of this conversation, but for now, let me start at the beginning. I am a fortunate man, and my fortune has made me quite wealthy. I do business all over the world and consequently travel everywhere. Italy is one of my favorite destinations, even if it is not where I strike my best deals. I like Italy because it breathes history, charm, and beauty. These are its true riches. Well, on my travels I have learned to appreciate the Renaissance, a golden age for that country, the fruits of which the whole world can now enjoy." Did Roberta know what Orson Welles said in one of his films? In 15th century Italy, there were murders, assassinations, the Borgias, revolts, and massacres, but out of all that came the great masterpieces of the Renaissance. In Switzerland, with 500 years of democracy and peace, they invented the cuckoo clock. I shall forgive this unflattering comment about your country, which is also unfair, but it speaks volumes about Italian art. And that is how I fell in love with it, spending fortunes acquiring works from that period. Today they are in my home in New York and in other places where I have put down roots. But there is one that is here, beneath our feet. It is guarded in the safe deposit boxes of this bank, thanks to the collaboration of our mutual friend. It is here because I have never felt confident displaying it in one of my homes. The risk would be enormous, as it is a work whose value could be inestimable. C plus or minus or," Roberta interrupted. "I am pleased for you, but I still do not understand what I have to do with this story, or how I can help. I am not exactly an art expert, certainly not of the Italian Renaissance, and I do not share your passion in the slightest. Roberta, our mutual friend told me that I would find in you a decisive, almost impetuous, but highly reliable woman. And reliability is exactly what I need from you. But be patient for just a moment, and you will understand." He took a sip of the cold tea before him and continued. "One day, while preparing to leave for another trip to Italy, a prestigious art dealer called to tell me he had a wonderful surprise waiting for me. He wouldn't say more over the phone because the art world can be as treacherous as drug trafficking. His curiosity was at its peak when he arrived in Italy. He immediately went to his friend the art dealer, who took him to his safe deposit box and showed him a painting that left him speechless. The scene was bloody, a clash between knights whose ferocity was evident in the faces of the antagonists, the posture of the horses seeming to be swept up in a vortex from which they could not escape, and the foot soldiers on the ground trying vainly to defend themselves against the animals' hooves and the knights' swords. He had imagined a religious subject or a portrait, never something like this. He found himself looking at a reproduction of the most sought-after, discussed, mysterious, and lamented work of the entire Italian Renaissance. That painting euro 70 x 80 cm euro could be an extraordinary discovery, one that would rock the entire art world and collectors globally. "No, don't get excited," the dealer said immediately. "It is not an original, nor even a preparatory sketch. At first glance, it seems well executed euro, certainly in need of a thorough and expert cleaning euro, a fine example of Renaissance painting. Its initial qualities did not justify the emphasis with which the dealer had spoken of its extraordinary nature. Look closely, he said. Focus your gaze on the brushstrokes depicting the hoods, tell me if other famous paintings, other hoods, don't leap to mind." My heart jumped into my throat and I whispered, "Leonardo." "I thought so too," the dealer replied, "but there is no certainty. It could perhaps be from his school, but even of that there is no trace. I studied this painting for months, searched for documents, consulted with colleagues, none of them know anything about it. On the contrary, most dismiss the idea. But you know well that a large part of Leonardo's output has been lost, destroyed, or scattered who knows where. Every now and then something emerges, critics argue over attribution, and very few are definitively confirmed as Leonardesque. This painting may not be by Leonardo, but perhaps it is. I can sell it to you at a price within your reach. If you manage to prove that it is by the genius Da Vinci, its value becomes incalculable, and you will become one of the most famous and fortunate collectors in the world. I am offering you a wager, bet on your luck. The dealer had touched the right chords, my passion for art and for a gamble. So I bought it. I still don't understand, Roberta said. That is exactly where you come in, Roberta, your reliability, certified by our mutual friend the director. I need to transport the painting to the greatest art historians, the foremost experts on Leonardo scattered around the globe. And for that, I must be able to trust implicitly whoever handles its transport, the customs formalities between countries, the insurance, and the best and safest routes. You will have to take care of everything. Roberta looked at Mr. Rodriguez with a questioning but interested expression. Transporting an invaluable work of art was quite different from shipping machinery, however large. But the challenge promised to be new and fascinating. Appendix. The family. It is impossible to know why family life did not capture Fausto's imagination. He undoubtedly spent most of his time away from home, and work certainly occupied him greatly, but that was probably not the only reason. Some might have said that he did not love his family, or his beautiful wife, or his children. But they would have been grossly mistaken. Fausto loved them in his own way, indeed, very much. Yet, he was never at home, and even during the holidays he spent time away from his family. He brought them to Carra, their first holiday home in the Leventina Valley, where the children and Wally spent their free time. Carra was later replaced by a house in Girone, in the Blenio Valley near the Lucomagno Pass. But the story didn't change. Fausto would take his wife and children to the mountains for the summer holidays, and after a couple of days he would return to Chiasso, occasionally popping back up for a quick taste of mountain life. Work called him back down to the valley. But it wasn't always just work, there was something else at play. In the way Fausto interpreted his role as the head of the family, husband, and father, there was something very old, almost atavistic, common to many men of his generation. His indispensable duty was to ensure a comfortable and reassuring quality of life for the family. And on this point, no only a Euro, not even his harshest critic a Euro, could reproach Fausto for neglecting his duty. Economic concerns, if there ever were any, never crossed the threshold of the home. The children enjoyed a good education, attending excellent schools in central Switzerland with the sole exception of Roberta, the rebel, who refused to go to boarding school, yet was still provided with a good education and study trips abroad. Wally too, who frequently hinted to her closest friends that she felt neglected by her husband, enjoyed comforts and luxurious from the AU pairs she shared the burden of raising the children with, to afternoons at the tennis club, to dinners with the English aristocracy, starting with Sommer. He once drove her across Florence in his Rolls-Royce, while the Florentines couldn't decide whether to admire the prestige of the car or the beauty of the woman inside it more. From a husband and father, however, one expects something else as well: affection, support, encouragement, an example, a sense of togetherness. In this regard, Fausto was not particularly generous. Not that he didn't provide these things, he simply didn't do so in an explicit and direct manner. Fausto always had a strong need to feel free from every constraint, including family conventions. But this does not mean that his imprint on the family is not felt. Today, fragments of Fausto can be recognized in each of his children. His passion for the mountains remained in all of them, but Andrea, the eldest son, cultivated it more than anyone else, taking it to a higher level by choosing to live, once he had formed his own family, at the top of the Lucomagno Pass. He dedicated much of his time to climbing the very mountains his father loved most. From his father, he also inherited an insatiable curiosity. It is the same curiosity that drives Roberta, with the difference that while Andrea expresses it through journeys to the ends of the earth, for Roberta it means traveling through the knowledge of the human soul and its motivations, seeking stimuli to apply to her daily life. Roberta naturally inherited Fausto's ability to lead people and to be an entrepreneur. Anna, who after a stint in the company chose to live as a simple employee but later preferred the life of an artiste painting and creating sophisticated mosaics has inherited Wally's eyes, the color of the sky, and her father's calmness, which conveys trust and reliability.